Section 1. The background details that rewrote everything. There is a frame in the third episode of The Simpsons that lasts less than a second. In the background of a scene at Springfield Elementary, on a bulletin board behind the main action, there is a hand-drawn flyer that reads, "Missing, our beloved cat. Last seen near the power plant." Beneath the text, a crude drawing of a cat with one eye larger than the other. That cat never appears in the episode. No character mentions it. No storyline involves it. It is just a piece of paper tacked to a wall, and the writers put it there for no reason that would ever serve the plot. Except it does serve something. It serves the texture of the world. It suggests that Springfield is a place where cats go missing near the power plant. It suggests that this is ordinary enough to warrant a flyer, but not extraordinary enough to cause alarm. In less than a second of screen time, a background detail tells you more about the soul of Springfield than most scenes manage in 3 minutes of dialogue. This is what The Simpsons has been doing since its very first episode. Building a world in the margins, telling stories in the corners of the frame, hiding information in the places your eyes aren't supposed to go. And for 4 hours, that is exactly where we are going. The writers and animators of The Simpsons have spent 36 years and close to 800 episodes constructing a background layer so dense, so deliberate, and so meticulously maintained that it functions as a parallel narrative running beneath the surface of every episode. Most of it goes unnoticed. Some of it has taken decades to surface online. A handful of details are so deeply buried that only the people who put them there know they exist. But the details are there. Every single episode, in every single frame, in every book spine and shop window and newspaper headline and crowd scene and chalkboard gag, the show is saying something it refuses to say out loud. This video is about finding it. Let's start with something that sounds small and turns out to be enormous. The newspapers. Springfield is a town with a newspaper. The Springfield shopper appears regularly throughout the series, usually as a prop carried by a background character or visible on a newsstand during a crowd scene. Most viewers, if they notice it at all, register it as wallpaper. A piece of set dressing that says, "This is a town that has things in it," and then they move on. The people who paused those scenes discovered something else entirely. The Springfield shopper's headlines, in episode after episode, reference events that either just happened in Springfield or are about to happen. In Season 4, there is a background shot of a newsstand where the shopper's headline reads, "Town prepares for annual chili cook-off." The chili cook-off isn't the subject of that episode. It isn't referenced in that episode's dialogue. But 2 episodes later, the chili cook-off appears as a major plot point. The newspaper in the background of episode 12 was previewing the story of episode 14. That isn't an accident. The production team at The Simpsons was seeding future storylines into background props weeks before those storylines aired. The newspaper was functioning as a stealth preview system, hiding episode summaries in plain sight for anyone paying close enough attention. This happens throughout the show's run with remarkable consistency. During the season that introduced the sideshow Bob Ark as a recurring threat, multiple background shots of the shopper contain headlines referencing a dangerous fugitive at large in issues that appear weeks before Bob makes his return appearance. In seasons dealing with Mr. Burns's business dealings, the shopper frequently carries financial headlines about power industry monopolies in background shots that predate the episodes where those themes become central. The newspaper isn't decoration. It's a broadcast schedule. And once you start looking at newspapers in the background, you start looking at everything else. Because the newspaper is only one layer. Consider the books. Springfield has a library. Springfield has a bookstore. Characters are occasionally seen carrying or reading books. And in almost every case where a book title is visible on screen, that title is doing something. Either it references the episode's theme, predicts a character's fate, or comments ironically on the scene happening in front of it. In an early season episode where Homer is struggling with his marriage, a background character in the library is carrying a book titled The Anatomy of Loneliness. In an episode where Bart is facing academic failure, the shelf behind Principal Skinner in his office contains a visible spine that reads, How Children Fail, a real educational book published in 1964 by John Holt, critiquing American schooling. The joke is funny on its own, but the joke also says something real about Skinner's philosophy and his understanding of the children in his school. He has the book. He has presumably read the book. He works in a system that continues to fail children anyway. That's 3 levels of meaning in a book spine that appears on screen for less than 2 seconds. The show does this constantly with television. Springfield has multiple televisions in almost every location, and those televisions are almost always on. The programming visible on background TVs throughout the series forms its own complete archive of fictional Springfield media. There's a show called Eye on Springfield, a local news program that appears in the background of dozens of scenes, and its segments visible for frames at a time in the background, while characters do something else in the foreground, consistently comment on the A-plot of the episode in ways that the characters themselves never acknowledge. In an episode centered on Homer's career ambitions, a background TV in Moe's Tavern is showing an Eye on Springfield segment about workplace failure and the psychology of settling. The bartender and patrons are ignoring it. Homer is sitting directly in front of it, not watching, talking about something unrelated. The show is literally broadcasting a commentary on Homer's situation to an audience that isn't paying attention, which is itself a commentary on the audience. Now let's talk about the couch. Specifically, the couch gag. Every episode of The Simpsons opens with the family racing to the couch for the theme sequence, and each episode features a different, increasingly elaborate gag in which something unusual happens when they sit down. Some couch gags last 5 seconds. Some last several minutes. They range from simple visual puns to elaborate parodies to full guest-directed animated short films. They are, on the surface, a recurring bit that changes every week. What most people haven't noticed is that the couch gags, taken as a sequence across the entire series, contain a hidden visual timeline of American animation history. The early couch gags are simple, almost primitive. They use basic movement and straightforward humor. As the seasons progress, the couch gags become more technically sophisticated, more self-referential, more cinematically ambitious. Guest animators from different studios and traditions are brought in, and each one brings their own visual language into the Simpsons universe for 30 seconds. This is partly a showcase for animation craft, but it's also a record, a visual archive of where American animation was, technically and aesthetically, at every moment of The Simpsons' run. Every year of couch gags documents what animation could do that year, what it was preoccupied with, what techniques were new, what references felt relevant. The couch gag isn't just a gag. It's an annual report on the state of the art. And within individual couch gags, there are details that have never been fully explained. In one famous sequence, the family sits on the couch and is immediately miniaturized, placed in a snow globe, and displayed on a shelf. The shelf is full of other snow globes. Each globe contains a tiny version of a different cartoon family from a different animated show. The show is briefly, visually, claiming its place in a lineage, saying, "We are one of these. We are part of this tradition. We know where we came from." In another sequence, the couch scene continues past the punchline. The joke lands, the family is in some absurd situation, and then the scene keeps going. The camera pulls back, continues pulling back, keeps pulling back until the Simpsons' living room is revealed to be part of a stage set, and the stage set is in a studio, and the studio is in a city, and the city is on a planet, and the planet is in a galaxy. It's a visual joke about scale. It's also a visual argument about significance. The family on the couch is both the center of everything and an almost invisibly small part of something vast. That sequence is a philosophy, hidden inside a 30-second opening bit. But the single most consistently overlooked background detail in The Simpsons isn't in the newspapers or the books or the couch gags. It's in the chalkboard. Bart's chalkboard punishment, where he writes a sentence repeatedly at the opening of the episode, is one of the show's most recognizable recurring images. Most people know the gag. They read the sentence, they laugh, and the animation moves on. The sentence is usually a joke, sometimes a meta-commentary on the episode, sometimes a topical reference, sometimes just a pun. What almost nobody has noticed is that across the entire run of the series, the chalkboard sentences, read in sequence, form a coherent, evolving portrait of Bart Simpson's psychological state and the writer's relationship with the audience. The earliest chalkboard gags are defiant. "I will not waste chalk. I will not sleep through my education." They have the energy of a kid who thinks getting caught is funny, who is performing his punishment rather than serving it. There is no genuine contrition. The sentences are technically about following rules, while radiantly demonstrating that Bart has no intention of following them. As the series progresses, the sentences shift. They become more self-aware, more openly meta, more frequently addressed to the audience rather than to the school's authority. This is not a cliffhanger. Appears before a mid-season episode. My butt does not deserve a website appears during the period when internet culture was becoming central to American life. The chalkboard starts acknowledging the show's own history, its own contradictions, its own duration. By the later seasons, something has genuinely changed in the tone. Some of the chalkboard sentences have a tiredness to them, a quality of weary self-reference that the early gags never had. I should not have been told to do this appears in season 24, and it reads differently than the cheerful defiance of season 2. It reads like a character who has been writing on this chalkboard for a very long time and has begun to wonder why. The chalkboard is a diary, Bart's diary, and in a strange way the show's diary. 36 years of a weekly ritual that started as a joke and accumulated slowly into something that documents how a character and a show relate to time, to punishment, and to the act of repetition itself. Speaking of things hidden in plain sight, let's talk about the Simpson house. 742 Evergreen Terrace is one of the most recognizable addresses in American fictional history. It appears in virtually every episode. The family returns to it at the end of almost every adventure. It is, structurally, the emotional center of the show, and it is also, architecturally, a building that makes no sense. The layout of the Simpson house changes constantly. Rooms appear and disappear. Staircases lead to different locations depending on the episode. The kitchen is adjacent to the living room in some shots and separated by a hallway in others. Bart's room is at the top of one staircase in Season 3 and at the top of a different staircase in Season 7. The basement, which becomes the site of multiple storylines, appears to change size dramatically depending on what the episode needs it to contain. This has been cataloged obsessively by fans over the decades. Floor plan enthusiasts have attempted to construct a consistent layout for the Simpson house and have universally failed, because the house, as depicted across hundreds of episodes, cannot exist in three-dimensional space. Its rooms don't add up. Its proportions are inconsistent. Its geography is, to use a precise term, impossible. The standard explanation is continuity error. The animators didn't always reference the same floor plan. Production happened at scale across different teams. Small inconsistencies accumulated into larger ones over time. That explanation is probably mostly true. But the scale of the inconsistency, the degree to which the Simpson house genuinely cannot be reconciled into a coherent space, suggests something more interesting to consider. The Simpson house isn't a real building, it's a feeling. It's the memory of a home, rather than a blueprint for one. It contains whatever the story needs it to contain, just as a remembered childhood home often contains more rooms in the memory than it had in reality. More space, more mystery, more possibility than the actual square footage could ever support. The show never explains why the house changes. The family never notices. The characters move through their impossible home as though its contradictions are invisible, because for them, they are, which is possibly the most realistic thing about the whole setup. Houses that we grew up in rarely feel like blueprints. They feel infinite and intimate at the same time, full of spaces that seem larger in memory than they were in life, organized by emotional logic rather than architectural logic. The Simpson house, with its wandering staircase and its basement that keeps changing size, is a childhood home as actually experienced rather than as measured. That might be the most deliberate incoherence in the history of television architecture. Now, there is one room in the Simpson house that deserves its own detailed examination: Homer's home office. In various seasons, Homer has used a space in the house, sometimes identified as the den, sometimes a corner of the basement, sometimes a room that appears and then vanishes as a workspace. And across that space, across those background appearances, there are details about Homer's life that you would never get from dialogue. In one episode, the bookshelf visible behind Homer in his home workspace contains, among other titles, a worn copy of a child's atlas, the kind of book a parent might keep because their child loved it, even after the child has grown past needing it. That's in the background. Nobody mentions it. It doesn't serve the plot. It just says something quiet about Homer that the show never says out loud. that he holds onto things because he can't bring himself to let go of who his children were. In the same shot, there is a photograph on the wall. It's too small to see clearly in standard definition, but in HD, it's identifiable as a candid shot of the family at a picnic, not a posed photo. Not a holiday portrait, a candid. Someone took a photo of the Simpsons having an ordinary afternoon, and Homer kept it and hung it in the room where he spent his private time. The episode isn't about family. It isn't about nostalgia. The photo is just there, in the background, doing the quiet work of telling you who Homer Simpson actually is when nobody's watching. That's the show. That's the real show, not the main plot. The room behind the main plot. The crowd scenes in The Simpsons deserve their own extended study. Springfield is a town that riots. It assembles, argues, disperses, forms mobs, holds town meetings, floods mows, packs the stadium, and generally behaves as a population of hundreds does. And in those crowd scenes across 36 years, the same faces keep appearing in the background with a consistency that rewards close attention. There is a man with an orange shirt who appears in almost every crowd scene in Springfield from season 2 onward. He has no name given in the credits. He is never the focus of any scene. He just keeps showing up. At the town meetings, in the stadium, in the crowd gathered outside the power plant, at the fair, at the protest. He is always there, slightly out of focus, always in his orange shirt, living his background life with perfect consistency while the named characters do their named things in the foreground. There are dozens of characters like this in Springfield. Background citizens who are drawn with enough specificity to be recognizable as individuals, who appear often enough to feel like real residents, but who never get names, never get lines, never get stories. They are the actual population of Springfield. The named characters, the ones the show focuses on, are a very small subset of a town that the animators have been populating in the margins for decades. And here's what makes this worth paying attention to. When The Simpsons focuses on a background character, when it briefly brings one of these nameless crowd members into focus, it almost always reveals that they have a complete interior life that has apparently been running the entire time. Hans Moleman is the most famous example, but he isn't unique. The show repeatedly demonstrates that the person in the orange shirt, the woman in the crowd at the town meeting, the kid on the bike in the background of the school scene, all of them have thoughts and feelings and stories. The background is full of people. This is one of the things The Simpsons does that almost no other show has ever done at its scale. It builds a background dense enough to feel populated, and it honors that population periodically by stepping back from the A-plot and letting you see what one of those background people is experiencing. The show cares about its extras, not all the time, not consistently enough to be called a policy, but enough. Enough to suggest that the animators understood they were building a world, and that a world has people in it who aren't the main characters. Let's end this section with a detail that is so simple it should feel obvious, and yet almost nobody has ever pointed it out directly. The sky in Springfield changes, not just between day scenes and night scenes, not just between seasons used as a narrative device. The actual character of the Springfield sky, the quality of its light, the density of its clouds, the color of its atmosphere, changes in a pattern that tracks the emotional tone of the episode. Episodes that deal with heavy emotional content. Homer's relationship with his mother, Lisa's loneliness, the darker moments in Marge's marriage are consistently animated with a sky that has a heavier, more muted quality. The light in those episodes is different. It comes from a lower angle, spreads more diffusely, casts longer shadows. The color palette of the backgrounds in emotionally heavy episodes is consistently shifted toward grays and deep blues and the specific amber of a sun that is already setting. Episodes that are primarily comedic, episodes built around absurdist plots or physical gags, are lit differently. Brighter, cleaner. The sky is a cartoon blue that doesn't exist in nature. The sun is high. The colors are saturated to the point of cheerfulness. The backgrounds aren't passive. They're participating in the story. The animators are using color and light and the quality of the Springfield sky to tell you how to feel about what you're watching before a single line of dialogue has been spoken. The sky is the show's emotional stage direction, and it has been playing that role for 36 years in the background of every outdoor scene. Most people watch The Simpsons for the jokes. The jokes are extraordinary, but the world built around and beneath and behind the jokes is something else. It's a world so carefully observed, so patiently constructed, so full of quiet intent that you could spend the rest of your life finding things in it that you missed the first 100 times through. And we are just getting started. Before we go any further, drop a comment and let me know where in the world you're watching from and what time it is there. It's always incredible to see how far this reaches. And if you want to keep going deeper into Springfield than most people ever have, subscribe. There's a lot more coming. Section 2. The food and drink codes. Food is everywhere in The Simpsons. It fills kitchen tables and fast food trays and vending machines and Homer's pockets and Lenny's lunch bag and the refrigerator that Homer opens approximately 900 times across 36 seasons without ever quite finding what he's looking for. Food in The Simpsons is so omnipresent that it disappears into the scenery. It becomes furniture. It becomes background. That is exactly when you should start paying closest attention to it. Because the food in The Simpsons is never just food, it is a system. A language that runs beneath the dialogue and the plot, expressing things about character and mood and social class, and the particular anxieties of American domestic life that the show never quite comes out and says directly. The food tells you who these people are in ways that their words sometimes can't or won't. Start with Homer. Homer's relationship with food is one of the most thoroughly documented behavioral patterns in fiction. He eats constantly, voraciously, indiscriminately. He eats foods that are depicted as objectively disgusting. He eats leftover pizza from the trash, a decade-old sandwich hidden behind the refrigerator, an amount of candy that would hospitalize anyone with functioning taste aversion. He eats when he's happy, when he's sad, when he's bored, when he's celebrating, and when he's grieving. Homer's eating never stops, and it never seems to provide the satisfaction it promises. He finishes one food and immediately reaches for the next. This behavior is funny. It's designed to be funny, but it's also a portrait of a particular relationship with comfort that is recognizable to anyone who has used food as a primary emotional regulation mechanism. Homer doesn't eat because he's hungry. He eats because something else is missing and food is immediately available in a way that other satisfactions aren't. His eating is an attempt to fill something that food can't fill, repeated endlessly because the filling never works. The show depicts this as comedy. The show has always depicted this as comedy. But if you watch Homer eat across 36 seasons, if you track the moments when his eating is most frantic and most excessive, those moments almost always correspond to episodes where Homer is under emotional stress that he has no other outlet for. He doesn't cry. He doesn't talk about his feelings in any sustained or productive way. He eats. And the eating doesn't help, but it's what he knows how to do, so he keeps doing it. The donut is the central symbol of all of this, and it has been from the beginning. Homer's relationship with donuts is so well established that it has become cultural shorthand for the character. But the specific visual of the donut, the circular pastry with the hole in the middle, the shape that is defined by its own emptiness, is not an accidental choice for the food that Homer loves above all others. A donut is a food shaped like a void. The thing that makes it a donut is the part that isn't there. Homer's comfort food is built around an absence. The animation has consistently played with this. The way Homer's eyes change when a donut appears, the specific quality of his longing. Donuts in The Simpsons are drawn with a level of care and detail that most food in animation doesn't receive. The glaze catches light. The sprinkles are individually rendered. They look genuinely delicious, which is part of what the show is doing. It wants you to understand Homer's desire, not just observe it. And underneath that desire is the visual reality that what Homer loves most is a thing built around a hole. Duff beer operates on a different level entirely. Duff is Springfield's dominant beverage, its cultural currency, its social lubricant, and the sponsor of a significant portion of Springfield's entertainment landscape. The Duff blimp has flown over Springfield events. Duff Gardens is a theme park. Duffman is a corporate mascot who has become, over the seasons, one of the show's most quietly complex supporting characters. Duff is everywhere. And Duff, the show revealed in one of its most underappreciated jokes, is the same beer regardless of which variety you order. In an episode focusing on Springfield's beer culture, Homer tours the Duff Brewery and discovers that Duff, Duff Light, and Duff Dry all flow from the same vat before being routed into different packaging. They are identical beers sold under different names for different prices to consumers who believe they are making meaningful distinctions between them. The beer doesn't change. The label changes. The experience is constructed. This is one of the sharpest pieces of consumer satire the show has ever delivered, and it delivers it inside a joke about beer that takes about 45 seconds of screen time. The gag is that Homer is horrified when he discovers the truth. Not because he cares about beer fraud, but because he cares about the idea that his choices mean something. He chose Duff Light because he believed it was distinct from regular Duff. Finding out that it isn't means finding out that his sense of himself as someone who makes real choices is, in this small but pointed way, an illusion. The beer is the same. The only difference is what he told himself about it. This is a joke about beer and simultaneously a joke about brand loyalty, consumer identity, marketing psychology, and the deep human need to believe that the things we prefer make us who we are. All of that is in a 45-second segment of a Simpsons episode from the mid-90s. Moe's Tavern deserves extended attention in this context, because the food and drink at Moe's tell a story about Springfield's working class that the show rarely addresses as directly in its dialogue. Moe's doesn't serve food. That's the baseline fact. It's a bar. There are peanuts in a bowl on the counter, and there is beer on tap, and there are occasionally mysterious bottles of spirits on the shelf behind Moe. But Moe's Tavern is not a place where you eat a meal. It is a place where you go after the meal is over, or instead of a meal, or before you go home to the meal that might not be ready or might not be enough. The men who populate Moe's, Homer, Lenny, Carl, Barney, are depicted as regulars, not because they have a particular taste for Moe's specific Duff, which is the same Duff you get at the Quick E-Mart, but because Moe's is a third place. A space that isn't home and isn't work, a place where they can be themselves in a way that neither home nor work allows for. They're not there for the beer. They're there because they need somewhere to be that doesn't require anything from them. The absence of food at Moe's is meaningful. Food belongs to home. Food is domestic. Food is produced by someone for someone, and receiving a meal is an act of care. At Moe's, nobody is caring for anyone in that way. The men sit on stools and drink what requires no preparation and eat peanuts from a bowl that Moe has been refilling from the same sack for 20 years. They are free of care in the most literal sense. Nobody at Moe's is being taken care of, and nobody is taking care of anyone else. It's a relief and a sadness at the same time, and the absence of food in the frame of Moe's Tavern is what makes that feeling visible without the show ever having to state it. Now let's look at the Quick E-Mart, because the Quick E-Mart is where Springfield's food system gets genuinely strange. Apu runs his store with a dedication that the show has always treated as excessive but has never quite explained. He is there at all hours. He works every shift. He maintains an inventory that is, on close examination, highly specific in ways that seem designed for a particular customer profile. The Quick E-Mart stocks an enormous quantity of Squishies, the show's fictional slushy drink. It stocks processed foods of every variety. It stocks items that have, in multiple episodes, been revealed to have been on the shelves since the store opened. Meat of ambiguous origin, eggs of uncertain age, a hot dog that has been rotating on the roller for a duration that the show treats as a running joke but which, if taken seriously, implies something disturbing about the Quick E-Mart's approach to food safety. The Quick E-Mart is not a place where healthy food is available. It is not a place where fresh food is reliably available. It is a place where the residents of Springfield's working-class neighborhoods can purchase food that is immediately available, heavily processed, and long shelf-stable. This is a portrait of what food access actually looks like in many American communities, not because the show is making an explicit political argument about food deserts or convenience store economics, but because it is accurately depicting the world that Homer Simpson and his neighbors actually inhabit. The freshest thing in the Quick E-Mart is usually the ice for the Squishies. Everything else has been sitting there for a while, and yet the Quick E-Mart is a beloved institution in Springfield. People go there not just out of necessity but out of preference. Apu's connection to his community, his genuine investment in his customers' lives, his memory for what people like and what they're going through, makes the Quick E-Mart something more than a convenience store. It is, in its strange way, another third place. A place where Springfield residents can be seen and known. The Squishy deserves a moment on its own. The Squishy is the Simpsons version of a Slurpee, the brightly colored ice beverage that has been a staple of American convenience stores since the 1970s. In the world of The Simpsons, the Squishy is available in flavors that are named rather than described. Blue is a flavor, red is a flavor, purple is a flavor. The flavors don't correspond to any real fruit or natural substance. They are color experiences. Chemical tastes engineered to be satisfying in ways that don't require reference to anything that grows in the ground. Bart drinks squishies constantly. It is arguably his drink the way Duff is Homer's drink. And there is a specific episode where Bart, through a squishy-related plot, discovers that drinking an enormous volume of squishy in a short time produces a temporary state of apparent genius. His inhibitions drop. He becomes, briefly, capable of extraordinary things. Then the squishy wears off, and he returns to normal. The joke is about sugar highs and children's behavior. But the structure of it, the bright artificial substance that temporarily elevates a child's mind before dropping them back into ordinariness, maps onto something the show returns to throughout its run. Springfield is full of artificial stimulants and chemical comforts that promise transformation and deliver only temporary relief. The squishy is doing what Duff does, what the donuts do, what the Quickie Mart's processed inventory does. It provides a hit of something vivid in a life that can feel, without those hits, colorless and repetitive, and then it ends. The food at the Simpsons dinner table is, across hundreds of episodes, a consistent and carefully maintained portrait of Marge's emotional state. Marge is the family's cook. This is one of the show's most traditional domestic arrangements, and it's one that the show has occasionally interrogated and more often simply maintained as a given. Marge cooks. The family eats what Marge cooks. And what Marge cooks changes meaningfully depending on where she is emotionally. In episodes where Marge is stable, content, and engaged with her family, the food is identifiable, complete, and occasionally ambitious. She has made a full meal. There is a main course with sides. The table looks like someone put thought and effort into it. In episodes where Marge is struggling, where she's anxious or disconnected or dealing with something she isn't talking about, the food on the table is subtly wrong. There's something missing. A side dish that should be there isn't. The main course is present but doesn't seem quite finished. The visual of the dinner table in these episodes has the quality of something assembled, rather than created the motions of a meal without the full investment in it. This is never commented on. The family sits down and eats whatever is in front of them, and the episode proceeds. But across the run of the series, if you watch the dinner table as a barometer for Marge's well-being, it tells you where she is before a line of dialogue has been spoken. When Marge is okay, the table is okay. When Marge is not okay, the table knows. The show has also used food specifically as a vehicle for class anxiety, in ways that are easy to miss because they're embedded in comedic context. The Simpsons are a working-class family, and the tension between their actual economic position and their aspirations shows up repeatedly in their relationship with food. When Homer gets a raise, or when the family comes into money, or when they visit a wealthy context like the country club or the executive dining room, food is immediately implicated. Homer doesn't know what the dishes are. Marge knows what they are but is nervous about the etiquette of eating them. Bart makes the wrong choice by enjoying his experience honestly. Lisa makes the right choice and feels isolated because she's the only one who does. The food at those tables is exactly right. Beautifully prepared, elegantly presented, clearly expensive. And it makes The Simpsons uncomfortable. Not because it's bad, but because it's a version of care and abundance that operates according to rules they weren't taught. They are hungry in a place full of food they don't know how to eat. There is an episode, referenced briefly in fan communities but rarely given the attention it deserves, where Homer discovers a food that he genuinely considers perfect. Not junk food, not a donut, not anything from the Quickie Mart. A sandwich, a specific sandwich that he assembles himself, in the kitchen, over the course of a scene that takes genuine pleasure in the construction of a meal. He toasts the bread. He layers the ingredients with visible care. He makes something by hand that is genuinely his, and then something in the episode's plot prevents him from eating it, and the sandwich is lost. The episode plays this as comedy. The audience laughs. But the image of Homer making that sandwich, the absorption he brings to it, the satisfaction visible in his expression as he assembles it, that image says something about Homer that the show almost never says directly. He has the capacity for care. He knows how to make something good. He is capable of creating, with attention and intention, something that nourishes rather than merely satisfies. The sandwich gets taken away before he can eat it, and Homer goes back to being Homer, reaching into the refrigerator for whatever is immediately available. But for a moment, in the background of a comedic plot, there was Homer making something beautiful. And noticing that moment changes how you see everything else he eats. The Krusty Burger is where this section has been building toward, because the Krusty Burger is the food location in The Simpsons that carries the most darkness beneath its surface. Krusty the Clown's fast food empire is depicted throughout the series as wildly successful and comprehensively dangerous. The burgers have been shown to contain ingredients that aren't beef. The meat has, in multiple episodes, been identified as coming from sources that the show treats as a punchline, but that would, in reality, represent serious health violations. The cooking conditions visible in behind-the-scenes moments at Krusty Burger consistently fail any reasonable food safety standard. The food makes people sick at a rate that should result in regulatory intervention and litigation on a scale that would bankrupt the company. And yet Krusty Burger remains open. It remains popular. Springfield's residents eat there constantly, return there after getting sick, bring their children there. The Krusty Burger is a fast food empire that demonstrably harms its customers and is demonstrably beloved by those same customers in a way that survives every evidence of its harm. This is one of the show's most efficient pieces of corporate satire. Krusty Burger is what happens when brand loyalty outlives any rational basis for it. The product is bad. The customers know, on some level, that the product is bad. The product makes them sick. They keep eating it. Because the brand is a childhood memory, because Krusty is a familiar face, because the Krusty Burger is what you get when you go to get fast food in Springfield, and the habit of going to get fast food in Springfield is older than any particular experience of getting sick from it. The emotional relationship with the brand has been fireproofed against every experience that should damage it. The show takes this one step further with Krusty himself. Krusty is explicitly depicted as someone who doesn't eat his own food. He has dietary restrictions, personal tastes, and standards for his own consumption that are entirely incompatible with the products his company sells. He is rich enough to eat differently. His customers are not. And so Krusty exists in a relationship with his brand where he profits from selling food he would never eat to people who can't afford not to eat it. The show depicts this as part of Krusty's character rather than as a moral failing. It's just how his world is organized. The food system of Springfield, taken as a whole, is a portrait of American food culture that the show has been building one episode at a time for 36 years. It shows you convenience over nutrition, brand loyalty over quality, comfort over health, abundance without satisfaction. It shows you a population that is always eating and is never quite fed. And it puts all of this in the background, in the stuff on the table and the signs on the fast food joints, and the items visible on quick E-Mart shelves where you can miss it completely or where it can, if you're paying attention, tell you something uncomfortably real about the world the show is set in. Springfield eats a lot. Springfield is always a little hungry, and the gap between those two facts is where the show keeps some of its most quietly devastating observations about the people who live there. Section 3. The music layer nobody talks about. The Simpsons has one of the most sophisticated musical architectures in television history, and almost nobody talks about it. This is partly because the show's music does its job so well that it becomes invisible. You don't notice the score because you're watching the show. The music is underneath the show, supporting it, shaping how you feel about what you're seeing, reinforcing jokes and emotional beats and tonal shifts without calling attention to itself. That invisibility is a sign of the music doing exactly what it should do. But when you start listening to it directly, when you treat the music of The Simpsons as its own subject rather than as background support for the visuals, what you find is a system of remarkable complexity, an ongoing musical conversation between the show and its own history that has been running in parallel to the visual narrative for 3 decades. Danny Elfman's original theme is the starting point, and it is worth considering in some detail even though it is probably the most recognized piece of music in the show's catalog. Elfman composed the theme in 1989, and it has been performed at the opening of every episode since. The Simpsons theme is built around a series of musical quotes and influences that Elfman has been relatively open about. Exotica music from the 1950s and 60s, a genre defined by Martin Denny and Arthur Lyman, built on vibraphones and unusual percussion, and a sense of staged, tropical otherness. The theme sounds like it belongs to a show about a family on permanent vacation somewhere strange. It sounds like domesticity as adventure, like the ordinary life of a household depicted as something exotic and slightly uncanny. That is not an accidental effect. Elfman was being asked to write a theme for a show about an American family that would make that family feel simultaneously recognizable and strange. He reached for exotica, a genre built on making familiar things foreign, and created something that still, after 36 years of repeated listening, retains a quality of slight unreality. The Simpsons' home sounds like somewhere you've never quite been. The theme's rhythmic structure is also deceptive. On first hearing, it seems to be in a straightforward meter. On closer listening, it turns out to be doing something more complicated, pushing against the beat in ways that create a subtle instability. The theme doesn't quite land where you expect it to. It keeps arriving at its moments fractionally off from where a simpler piece of music would put them. The effect is hard to name but easy to feel. A sense that the music is slightly ahead of itself, or behind itself, the musical equivalent of a person who can't quite be still. Alf Clausen was the principal composer for The Simpsons for most of its run. From 1990 to 2017, he scored over 500 episodes. This is an almost incomprehensible volume of work, and the legacy it produced is a 27-year archive of original music that covers every conceivable emotional and comedic register. What Clausen developed over those seasons, episode by episode, was a system of musical signatures for Springfield and its residents. Recurring motifs, short musical phrases that came to be associated with specific characters, locations, or emotional states. These signatures were mostly too brief and too embedded in the score to be consciously recognized by most viewers. But they were there, doing unconscious work. Burns has a musical signature that appears across hundreds of episodes. It's built around low strings and a particular harmonic structure that belongs to the tradition of villain scoring in classical music and film, but Clausen individualized it in ways specific to Burns. The signature evolves over the series in ways that track Burns's changing role in the narrative. In early seasons, it's grand and theatrical, befitting a villain who takes his own villainy seriously. In later seasons, as Burns becomes more absurd and more pathetic, the signature changes, the same harmonic material, but played with less grandeur, more irony, the musical equivalent of a costume that used to fit and now hangs wrong. Homer has a musical signature too, and it's one of the most interesting in the show's catalog. Homer's musical theme is built around a melodic structure that contains within it a quality of perpetual almost resolution. It reaches for its resolution and doesn't quite arrive, and then reaches again and doesn't quite arrive again. It is music that wants something and keeps not getting it in a way that is simultaneously comic and, if you listen to it as describing an emotional state rather than scoring a gag, genuinely poignant. Marge's musical presence in the score is more subdued, which is itself meaningful. Marge rarely has a musical moment that belongs specifically to her. The score tends to become about the family when Marge is the focus, the family's emotional continuity rather than Marge's individual interiority. This musical absence, the relative scarcity of music that says, this is Marge's experience rather than this is the family's experience, tracks with the show's occasional tendency to depict Marge primarily in relation to others. Her musical identity is woven into the family's musical identity in a way that Homer's, with his near-constant musical commentary, is not. Lisa's music is the most classical in texture, which is appropriate for a character defined by her relationship with formal musical tradition. But Clausen also gave Lisa's musical presence a quality of distance from the rest of the score, as though the music responding to Lisa is from a slightly different register of the musical universe than the music responding to Homer's Donuts or Bart's pranks. When Lisa plays saxophone in the show, she is accessing something that the rest of Springfield doesn't quite share. The score knows this and reflects it. Lisa's saxophone performances, which appear throughout the series, deserve particular attention because they function as plot commentary in ways that are rarely acknowledged. The pieces Lisa plays, and the way she plays them, consistently map onto the emotional terrain of the episode. In happy episodes, Lisa's playing is warm and rounded, technically assured, pleasurable. In episodes dealing with her loneliness or alienation, her playing becomes more isolated, more abstract, technically brilliant but searching for something it hasn't found. There is an episode where Lisa plays a piece of music in her room, while the rest of the family is dealing with a crisis downstairs. The music she's playing is identifiably minor key, identifiably searching. It doesn't resolve, it doesn't land. She keeps playing, and the note she's reaching for keeps not arriving, and downstairs the family argues, and the two levels of the house are both doing the same thing in different registers, looking for something that isn't there, and the score connects them by giving Lisa's unresolved playing the same harmonic character as the emotional situation in the rest of the house. The music isn't underscoring the scene, it's participating in it. The Simpsons' approach to musical guest appearances is a subject in its own right. The show has featured dozens of musicians performing as themselves or in some capacity related to themselves, and in almost every case, the way the show uses those musicians tells you something about what the show thinks music is for. When Tito Puente appears, he performs. He plays. The music isn't a prop or a credential, it's what Puente does, and the show depicts it as something powerful enough to channel grief and anger into something beautiful. Puente's alibi for the night of Burns' shooting is a musical alibi. He was so fully engaged in creating that he had transcended the capacity for violence. The music saved him from his own rage. The show treats this as funny and entirely true simultaneously. When King appears and plays for Homer, it's depicted as a genuine emotional exchange between King's music and Homer's sadness. And the exchange works. Homer is moved. The music reaches him. The show, which spends a lot of its time satirizing American culture's relationship with art, occasionally allows art to simply land without irony. King landing on Homer's sadness without commentary is one of those moments. The guest musicians who don't get that treatment, the ones whose appearances feel more like celebrity cameos than musical events, tend to be musicians whose cultural moment was more about celebrity than about music. The distinction the show makes, usually implicitly, is between people who are their music and people who have music. The ones who are their music get musical moments that the score takes seriously. The ones who have music get jokes. There is a recurring musical phenomenon in The Simpsons that fans have called the Springfield Orchestra moment, an episode beat where the show's score briefly abandons its usual television music conventions, expands into something genuinely cinematic and emotionally full. These moments tend to occur at the emotional peaks of the series' most beloved episodes. They are short, they don't call attention to themselves, and they pass quickly. But they are audibly different from the surrounding score. The instrumentation expands. The dynamics change. Something happens in the music that wouldn't be out of place in a feature film. These moments are Clausen's signature contribution to the show. He was trained as a classical conductor and composer, and he brought that training to bear in these brief openings in the score, where the television comedy framework relaxed and something more ambitious came through. They don't happen often. They happen enough that over 27 seasons, they add up to a significant body of moments where The Simpsons' music stopped being functional television underscoring and became something else. There is an episode many fans consider it among the greatest the show has produced, where Homer and Marge dance together at the end. The plot of the episode has been about their marriage, about the ways years of a particular life together can pull two people apart and then, unexpectedly, put them back in the same room at the same moment. They dance, it's a short scene, and what happens in the score during that dance is one of the most fully realized pieces of music in the entire series. Clausen gives it everything. The theme that plays as they dance is built from a motif that has been buried in the show's score for seasons, a short phrase that appears in background moments associated with the Simpson marriage, and in that final scene, it expands, becomes the thing it was always trying to be, and the dance ends. Most people remember the scene as a visual and emotional moment. The music is what makes the visual possible. Without the score, it's two cartoon characters swaying in a room. With the score, it's 30 years of love and difficulty distilled into 90 seconds of animation. Now, there's an aspect of The Simpsons' musical landscape that has received almost no attention outside of specialized fan communities: the use of pre-existing music in ways that create layers of meaning through historical context. The Simpsons uses licensed music throughout its run, and the choice of which song to license for which moment is almost never random. The songs arrive with histories, with connotations, with decades of meaning accumulated by other uses in other contexts. When the show uses a piece of music, it imports all of that history into the frame. In an episode dealing with Homer's nostalgia for a period of his life before responsibility set in, the show uses a song from that era that carries its own weight of cultural memory. The song doesn't just evoke Homer's youth in the abstract. It evokes a specific feeling about that period, a feeling that millions of viewers share with Homer because they were also young when that music was current. The shared nostalgia is deliberately engineered by the music choice, and it does in 3 seconds what pages of dialogue could not do. It puts you inside Homer's emotional experience by giving you the same access point he has. You heard that song when you were young too? Now you feel what he feels. The show's awareness of music's ability to do this kind of time travel is remarkable. It uses period music the way a photographer uses focus and depth of field to pull the viewer into a specific emotional location before the story catches up with them. The music arrives first, the feeling arrives with the music, then the scene begins, and you're already where the scene needs you to be. There is one episode that exists as a kind of museum of the show's entire musical philosophy. The episode is about music, and it's about the relationship between making music and feeling something. And in it, music is depicted as the only language adequate to certain kinds of experience. The plot involves Lisa, as many of the show's most musically serious episodes do. She encounters a musician who teaches her something about the relationship between technical skill and emotional truth. The lesson is simple. Technique without feeling is hollow, but feeling without technique can't be communicated. You need both. You need to be able to execute the thing your heart is trying to say. This is the show's position on music and, by extension, on comedy and storytelling. The Simpsons has always been technically brilliant. It has also always been trying to feel something. The best episodes are the ones where the technique and the feeling arrive at the same moment, where the joke is perfectly constructed and also genuinely true. That's what the best episodes of The Simpsons are: technique and feeling together. The musical lesson in that episode is the show describing itself. There is a category of musical moment in The Simpsons that is so consistent and so overlooked that it deserves its own name. Call them the quiet moments. They occur when the main comedic or dramatic action has temporarily resolved, and the show takes 5 to 10 seconds to let a character simply be in a space with the score. No dialogue, no joke, no plot advancement. Just a character and the score and a few seconds of something that, in most television, would be edited out. These quiet moments are distributed throughout the series. They don't cluster in the famous episodes or the emotionally ambitious ones. They appear in ordinary episodes, in the middle of plots that are primarily comedic, in moments that have no narrative justification for existing. A few seconds of Homer sitting alone while the score plays something that describes his aloneness. A few seconds of Marge at a window while the music outside the joke makes its own statement. A few seconds of Lisa walking home while the score says something about that walk that the show would never say in words. These moments are the show's heart. Not the famous moments, not the emotional peaks, not the musical swells at the end of the best episodes. The quiet 5 seconds in the middle of an ordinary episode where the show stops and simply observes a character in time, with music, and lets them be human. That is what the music layer of The Simpsons has been doing. 36 years of being the place where the show says the things it can't say with animation or dialogue. Being the layer of the story that bypasses your conscious mind and reaches the part of you that knows, without being told, that something is true. The show's composers have been speaking to that part of you since 1989, and most of us, most of the time, have been hearing them without knowing it. Section 4. The Character Design Secrets. The way The Simpsons draws its characters is one of the most studied and most written about aspects of the show's visual identity. The 4 fingers, the overbite, the yellow skin, the bulging circular eyes, these features have been analyzed, replicated, parodied, celebrated, and theorized about more than almost any other design choice in animation history. And yet the most interesting things about how The Simpsons draws its characters aren't the famous features. They're the things you haven't thought about. The things that have been sitting in the frame for 36 years, encoding information about these characters in their visual design, while everyone was busy talking about the yellow skin and the 4 fingers. Let's start with clothes. The Simpsons family wears the same clothes in almost every episode. Homer's blue pants and white shirt and orange shirt. Marge's red dress and pearls. Bart's red shirt and blue shorts. Lisa's red dress and white pearls. Maggie's red romper, and the bow that sits on top of her head. These are the characters' definitive visual identities, and they almost never change. This is standard practice for animated television. Consistent character design is partly a production necessity and partly a recognition that audiences need to be able to identify characters instantly. But The Simpsons has been running long enough and is produced with enough care that the constancy of the family's wardrobe has moved beyond practical necessity into something that deserves its own examination. Homer's orange shirt is not a neutral choice. Orange is a color associated with work, with caution, with the safety vests worn by laborers. It is the color of the equipment operator, the road crew worker, the person who works in an environment where they need to be visible to the people around them. Homer wears his orange shirt every day in an environment, the nuclear power plant, where such visibility matters. The shirt he wears at home, his casual identity, is the color of his working life. The uniform of his job has become so thoroughly his identity that he wears a version of it even when he isn't there. Marge's pearls deserve extended attention because they appear in almost every depiction of Marge across the entire run of the series, and they are doing more visual work than they appear to do. Pearls, in the cultural context the show is drawing from, are associated with a specific image of respectable American womanhood. The pearls and the house address and the careful maintenance of the home. This is the visual vocabulary of a particular feminine ideal that was dominant in American culture through the 1950s and has existed as a reference point, sometimes nostalgic and sometimes critical, ever since. Marge wears pearls because she belongs, visually and temperamentally, to a tradition of American femininity that values composure, hospitality, and the invisible labor of maintaining a family's emotional and physical well-being. The pearls also mark Marge as someone who cares about appearance in a context where that caring requires effort. The Simpson household is not a pearl-wearing environment. It is loud and chaotic, and Homer regularly destroys things, and Bart's pranks have structural consequences. Marge maintains her pearls, her careful presentation, her standard of visual order inside a household that tests that standard every day. The pearls are resistance as well as identity. She will maintain this. She will look like this, no matter what the house looks like, no matter what Homer does, no matter how much the world presses. There are episodes where the pearls become plot relevant, where their meaning is tested or inverted or stripped away temporarily. In those episodes, the visual removal of the pearls works precisely because their consistent presence has established what they mean. Marge without her pearls is Marge at a moment of fracture. The viewer knows this instantly, without explanation, because the design has built that meaning across hundreds of episodes of wearing them. Bart's red shirt is the visual color of energy, of heat, of urgency. It is the color that draws the eye, that signals presence, that says I am here in the most direct visual language available. Bart's shirt is the visual equivalent of his personality, impossible to ignore, slightly too bright for the context, fundamentally incapable of being background. Even in crowd scenes, Bart's red shirt pulls your eye to him before any other visual element of the scene. Lisa's red dress performs a slightly different function. Lisa and Bart share a color family, both red, which visually marks them as siblings even when they're in opposition, but Lisa's red is administered differently. Her dress is a more formal garment than Bart's shirt. It suggests occasion, order, presentation. Lisa dresses as if every moment might matter, as if the appropriate response to the world is to present yourself as though you've thought about it. Her red is the red of effort and care, rather than the red of energy and disruption. Same color family, opposite emotional register. The single most analytically rich piece of clothing in The Simpsons is Maggie's bow. Maggie is 1 year old and wears a bow on her head at almost all times. The bow is pink. It is the visual shorthand for baby girl, the most generic and culturally loaded infant accessory available, and it sits on top of Maggie's head as her primary visual identifier. The bow says, this is a baby, this is a girl, this is the youngest, the most helpless, the one who requires the most care. The bow is also, if you've accepted the theory that Maggie is the most intelligent and most capable member of the Simpson family, the most effective disguise in Springfield. Maggie wears the bow and the world sees baby. They stop looking. They don't ask questions about what a baby might be thinking or planning or observing. The bow is Maggie's camouflage, and it was provided to her at birth by a culture that already had a complete set of expectations about what she was and was prepared to see nothing beyond them. There are specific episodes where Maggie's bow changes color. This is rare enough to be notable and has been documented by dedicated fans who track such things. The bow is almost always pink, but occasionally, in specific episodes or during specific moments within episodes, it shifts. The production team has never, to my knowledge, publicly explained these variations. They may be production inconsistencies. They may be intentional. Either way, the episodes in which Maggie's bow deviates from its standard pink are worth watching with particular attention because those are often episodes in which Maggie herself deviates from her standard performed passivity. The bow's color and Maggie's behavior may be correlated. The show may be using a costume detail to signal when Maggie has decided to stop pretending. Now, Mr. Burns. Burns's physical design is one of the most elaborate and most carefully maintained in the series, and it tells a story that is separate from anything Burns says or does. Burns is drawn to suggest extreme age in ways that go beyond his small stature and stooped posture. His proportions are inhuman. His hands are drawn with a specificity that suggests they belong to someone who has been alive long enough for time to fundamentally alter how flesh and bone sit together. His eyes, which in close-up shots are drawn with particular care, have a quality of extraordinary depth, not the depth of wisdom, but the depth of someone who has been watching things for a very long time and has developed a relationship with observation that is separate from any feeling about what they're observing. Burns's design, across the series, undergoes subtle shifts that track with the show's shifting understanding of his character. In the earliest seasons, Burns is drawn with more energy, more physical menace, a cruelty that is depicted as active and engaged. He is doing evil things, and his design reflects the engagement of someone who has chosen his villainy and commits to it. As the series progresses, Burns becomes more frail in his design, more hunched, more physically diminished. The evil is still there, but it has aged. It has become more reflexive, more habitual, something Burns does because he has always done it rather than because he is currently choosing to. His design tracks this shift. The posture becomes more extreme, the hands more pronounced, the eyes more sunken. This is a visual biography running beneath the episode-by-episode plot. Burns's design has been telling the story of a man aging into his own cruelty, becoming less the architect of his villainy and more the product of it for 3 decades. The visual relationship between Burns and Smithers, as depicted through their character designs, is one of the most carefully composed in the show. Burns and Smithers are drawn to complement each other in ways that go beyond their narrative relationship. When they appear in frame together, their proportions create a specific visual dynamic. Burns always smaller, more fragile, more like something that requires protection, and Smithers always adjacent, slightly turned toward Burns, his physical orientation permanently, suggesting that his primary spatial reference is Burns's location in the room. Smithers doesn't just stand next to Burns. He orients himself to Burns the way a satellite orients itself to its planet. This visual relationship is maintained across hundreds of appearances with a consistency that suggests it was a deliberate choice in the original design rather than an emergent property of their story relationship. The design knew what their dynamic was going to be before the stories fully developed it. The visual relationship preceded the narrative relationship. Sideshow Bob's hair deserves a section of its own, and it gets one, because Bob's hair is one of the most elaborately meaningful design choices in the show's history. Bob's hair is a massive, rounded, palm tree-shaped construction of bright auburn that extends outward from his head in all directions. It is recognizable from a distance. It is instantly identifiable. It is also, as anyone who has studied geometry can confirm, a specific mathematical shape. Bob's hair is essentially a perfect hemisphere, a dome, the shape of something protected, enclosed, sealed. This is a character who is, narratively, the show's most intellectual villain, the character whose crimes are driven by aesthetic offense and cultural frustration rather than by greed or power hunger. Bob is offended by vulgarity. Bob is offended by low culture. Bob is a man who contains within himself a perfectly ordered world of high culture and refined taste, and has spent his criminal career trying to impose that order on a Springfield that refuses to accommodate it. His hair geometrically describes his project, a perfect dome of order held above a world he considers chaotic. The visual joke visible in every single crowd scene Bob appears in is that his perfect dome of hair exists in perpetual tension with the world around it. Bob's hair keeps getting caught in things. Gets caught in fences, gets caught in doors, disrupts his escape routes, betrays his hiding places. The perfectly ordered dome keeps running into the physical reality of a world that won't organize itself around it. The hair is the joke, but the joke is the character. There is also a detail in Bob's design that fans have noted, but that receives less discussion: the shoes. Bob wears large, floppy shoes of the kind associated with clowns, and their persistence in his wardrobe, even after his break from Krusty's show, even in contexts where those shoes seem absurd, connects him permanently to the world he has rejected. He cannot escape the visual vocabulary of where he came from, no matter how far he goes. His sideshow past follows him on his feet wherever his intellectual pretensions carry him. Homer's physical evolution across the series is, like Burns's, a visual biography running beneath the plots. Homer in early seasons is drawn with more angularity, more distinct features, a design that has more edges to it. As the series progresses, Homer gets softer, rounder, more pillow-like. His proportions become more extreme, his stomach more prominent, his posture more slumped. The Homer of season 25 is physically a different person from the Homer of season 2, and the transformation is gradual enough that you can watch the seasons in sequence and feel it accumulating the way you feel a person changing over years. This visual evolution corresponds to and perhaps encodes the character evolution. Early Homer is more reactive, sharper, more specifically himself in his responses to the world. Later Homer is softer in all senses, more likely to absorb whatever the episode requires of him, more pliable. The roundness isn't just physical expansion. It's the visual language of a character who has been smoothed by time, who has had his edges worn down by decades of experience, who has become comfortable in a way that is also a kind of surrender. The yellow skin, finally, deserves its proper analysis, because the yellow skin has been discussed mostly in terms of production practicality and almost never in terms of what it actually does visually. The practical origin of The Simpsons' yellow skin is documented. Matt Groening wanted a color that would immediately distinguish the show from any live-action production and would work on the television screens of the early 1990s, which had a tendency to shift colors. Yellow was distinctive and television stable. It was a practical choice. But what yellow does visually, over 36 years of seeing it every week on these specific characters, is something that transcends its practical origin. Yellow is the color of warmth, of light, of the sun, of things that glow. It is also the color of unease, of certain kinds of illness, of the warning sign, of things that are not quite right. Yellow sits at the edge between inviting and alarming. And these characters, in their yellow skin, sit at the same edge. They are warm and they are wrong. They are inviting and they are strange. The yellow skin makes them instantly, consistently other while making them instantly, consistently lovable. It's the color of something you want to go toward and something that makes you wonder if you should. That dual quality, beloved and slightly off, warm and subtly alarming, describes the Simpsons themselves. As characters, as a family, as a version of the American family that is recognizable enough to love and strange enough to keep studying, the yellow skin is doing all of that, every frame, without being noticed. Character design in The Simpsons is the visual argument for who these people are, made before anyone opens their mouth and sustained without a word of dialogue across 36 years of episodes. The design works in the background of everything else, holding the characterization steady, telling you things about these people in the grammar of color and shape and proportion that the narrative occasionally confirms but rarely has to explain. The design does the explaining. It does it quietly, and it does it constantly, and it has been doing it since the 17th of December, 1989, when these yellow people first walked across your screen. Section 5. The Writer's Room Easter Eggs. The Simpsons has, across its run, employed some of the most educated writers in the history of American television. The Harvard Lampoon has historically been a primary recruiting ground, and the show's writer's room has at various points been populated by people with backgrounds in mathematics, physics, political theory, linguistics, history, and philosophy, in addition to comedy. This is an unusual depth of specialized knowledge for a television writing staff, and it shows up in the work in ways that are easy to miss precisely because the jokes are funny enough that you don't necessarily notice what's underneath them. The mathematical jokes are the most documented example of this phenomenon, and they're worth examining in some detail, because they demonstrate the degree to which the writers were willing to put genuinely sophisticated material into the background of their jokes. The show contains several mathematically accurate references that require real knowledge to construct. The most famous is the Homer Cubed segment from a Treehouse of Horror episode, in which Homer passes through a dimensional portal and ends up in a three-dimensional world. The segment was supervised by a mathematician, and the mathematical equations visible on surfaces in the three-dimensional space are real equations, not decorative nonsense. Among the equations visible on the walls of Homer's 3D adventure is one that, if solved, yields a specific numerical result that is related to Fermat's last theorem. This is in a Treehouse of Horror segment. It's in the background. It's on the wall for a few frames. Nobody explains it. The joke that's happening in the foreground is about Homer being in 3 dimensions, which is funny on its own and requires no mathematical literacy to appreciate. The equation on the wall is for the mathematicians. It's a signal. The show is saying, "We put this here. We know you're out there. Here is something specifically for you, buried in the wall of a dimensional joke where the non-mathematicians will never look." This practice of encoding subject-specific material in the background for the subset of the audience capable of recognizing it runs throughout the show. Legal jokes that are technically accurate to an absurd degree. Scientific references that use proper methodology. Historical references that require specific knowledge to fully appreciate. The show has consistently maintained a policy of respecting its audience's intelligence by including material that rewards intelligent engagement, without ever requiring that intelligence to understand the primary joke. The show's relationship with its own production process is another source of layered material that most viewers miss. The Simpsons has been remarkably self-aware about what it is and how it's made for its entire run, and this self-awareness shows up in episodes that comment on their own production, on the nature of television, on the experience of making and watching the same show for multiple decades. In an episode from the show's later seasons, a character within the show pitches an animated series that has the same name, the same family, and the same premise as The Simpsons. The in-universe animated show is depicted as a cynical, commercial product designed to generate revenue and sell merchandise. The episode uses this fictional version of the show to make jokes about the real show's own history, its own commercialization, its own longevity. It's a joke about The Simpsons that exists inside The Simpsons, told by characters who are themselves products of The Simpsons. The layers of this kind of self-reference are genuinely dizzying when you think them through. The show is simultaneously the thing being commented on and the thing doing the commenting. The characters exist inside the joke about the show, while also being the evidence that the show is worth making the joke about. It's a knot of self-reference that requires you to hold multiple perspectives simultaneously, and the show does it while remaining funny enough that you can just enjoy it without having to. The cameos by writers and production staff in the background of episodes are a less discussed form of insider Easter egg. Across the run of the series, members of the writing staff, directors, producers, and other production personnel have been animated into crowd scenes, background roles, and occasional specific scenes. These appearances are usually subtle enough that you'd need to know what the person looks like in order to recognize them. But they've been documented by fans who paid close attention, and they accumulate into a significant hidden cast of real people living inside the fictional Springfield. Some of these appearances are gags. A writer who has been feuding with a producer, animated into a scene and then immediately having something bad happen to them. Institutional humor. The kind of joke you make about your workplace that your workplace then embeds into the product. Other appearances are more affectionate people appearing in scenes connected to their particular contributions to the show, visible for a few frames in the background of moments that they helped create. The production code system of The Simpsons is a detail that sits in the show's technical scaffolding, rather than in its visible content, but it has its own hidden logic that's worth examining. Each episode is assigned a production code, and those codes, across the series, have been used to encode information about episode content, production challenges, and occasionally inside jokes that only make sense if you understand the coding system. Fans have spent years decoding the production codes, and the patterns they've found suggest that the people assigning codes were, at least occasionally, playing games with the assignment system. The Harvard Lampoon connection deserves more attention than it usually gets, Because it's not just a recruiting pipeline, it's a cultural influence that has shaped the show's humor in specific and identifiable ways. The Harvard Lampoon, at its best, operates at the intersection of extremely high intelligence and extremely juvenile humor. It is simultaneously the most sophisticated and the most willfully silly publication in American collegiate history, a place where people with stratospheric academic credentials have traditionally applied their intelligence to the problem of making a joke about a fart. That combination of high and low, of genuine intellectual depth and gleeful vulgarity, is the tonal signature of The Simpsons at its best. The show is simultaneously smarter than anything else on television and willing to spend 60 seconds on a joke about Homer sitting on something uncomfortable. The Lampoon didn't invent that combination, but it trained the people who brought it to the show. And the Lampoon's tradition of institutional satire, of using humor to take apart the systems and structures that surround you, shows up directly in how The Simpsons has handled its most ambitious satirical targets. The nuclear power industry, corporate media, local government, educational bureaucracy, the criminal justice system, American religion. These are not targets that most sitcoms have bothered to take seriously. The Simpsons has taken them seriously enough, equipped with writers who understood their subjects to produce satire that genuinely illuminates rather than merely gestures. The real-world Springfield that served as the show's template is a subject that the production has carefully managed across decades of non-answers. Matt Groening has made the connection to Springfield, Oregon explicit, and then the show continued ignoring that connection. But the Oregon Springfield leaves traces in the show that are visible if you know what you're looking for. The geography of Springfield, Oregon, its relationship to mountains and rivers, and the specific quality of the Pacific Northwest landscape has informed some of the background environments in The Simpsons in ways that are subtle but consistent in the earlier seasons. The feel of the Springfield landscape in certain episodes, the quality of the light, the character of the natural environments visible in background shots, has a Pacific Northwest quality that doesn't quite match any other American region. The mountains behind Springfield in various establishing shots look like Oregon mountains. The rivers have the character of Pacific Northwest rivers. These are details in the background, in the environment rather than in the characters or the stories, but they're there. The show's engagement with its own history in the later seasons creates a category of Easter egg that is specifically about duration. As the show has run for 36 years, it has accumulated so much internal history that references to that history have become their own form of Easter egg, identifiable only by viewers who have been with the show long enough to catch them. A visual callback to a specific joke from Season 4, embedded in the background of a Season 20 episode. A character design detail that echoes an older, forgotten version of the same character. A plot that is structured as a direct parallel to a plot from decades earlier, with enough variation that it doesn't feel like repetition, but enough similarity that it resonates differently for longtime viewers. These duration-based Easter eggs are the ultimate insider reference, the ones that require the most investment to catch, and that reward that investment with a specific pleasure that can't be faked. You can't manufacture the feeling of catching a reference to something you watched 25 years ago. That pleasure is real and specific and available only to the people who were there. The show has been putting things into its backgrounds and its structures for decades that will only register years later to the people who stayed. They're letters to the future, written in the visual and narrative vocabulary of a show that knew from very early on that it was going to be around long enough to send them. Section 6. The Guest Star Conspiracy. The Simpsons has hosted more celebrity guest appearances than any other show in television history, and that statement is not hyperbole. Close to 1,000 individual guest stars have appeared in the show across 36 seasons. They have ranged from the most culturally prominent figures of every decade the show has run through to relative unknowns who appeared for a single line in a single episode. They have included world leaders, athletes, artists, musicians, comedians, actors, scientists, Nobel laureates, and at least one person who was, at the time of their appearance, wanted by federal authorities. Most discussions of The Simpsons' guest star history focus on the most famous appearances or the most absurd ones. The Michael Jackson story, the Leonard Nimoy cameo, the various world leaders who lent their voices to brief walk-on roles. These are the headline-level stories. What hasn't been examined as thoroughly is what the guest star history as a whole tells you about the show. About what it wanted to be, about what it thought was worth celebrating, about the relationship between the show's inside world and the outside world it kept inviting in. Michael Jackson's appearance is the starting point for any serious examination of the guest star phenomenon because it is the most elaborately layered guest appearance in the show's history. In the Season 3 episode Stark Raving Dad, Homer is committed to a mental institution where he meets a large white man who claims to be Michael Jackson. The character listed in the credits under the name John J. Smith was voiced by Michael Jackson himself, who requested that his involvement not be publicly credited at the time of original broadcast. Jackson performed all of the dialogue for the character, including speaking voice and singing. The premise of the episode, a man who claims to be Michael Jackson despite not being recognizable as Michael Jackson, is a sophisticated joke about celebrity, identity, and the way fame creates an image that can be separated from the person it belongs to. The large white man claiming to be Michael Jackson is, within the fiction, not Michael Jackson. He is someone who has absorbed the cultural image of Michael Jackson to the degree that he has become it in his own experience, even though the world can't see it. Jackson himself is performing this character, which means Jackson was performing a character who claims to be a version of Jackson that the world doesn't recognize. The layers of this are not accidental. Jackson reportedly loved the script and specifically requested to perform it without credit, which suggests he found something in the premise worth exploring from the inside rather than merely observing from outside. What he found there, the gap between the cultural image of a celebrity and the person inside it, the experience of being known through a version of yourself that you didn't fully choose, is the episode's actual subject. And the most famous person in the world at the time was willing to explore it under a pseudonym in an animated comedy, which tells you something about how seriously Jackson took the opportunity. There is a detail in the episode that is rarely discussed. The song that the Michael Jackson character writes for Lisa's birthday, the one called Happy Birthday Lisa, is the emotional climax of the episode. It's a song about seeing someone who feels unseen, about recognizing someone whose intelligence and individuality make them lonely, about the specific love that says, "I see who you actually are." Jackson wrote the song. Jackson performed it. And within the episode's fiction, it's written by a man in a mental institution who claims to be someone the world doesn't believe he is, for a girl who feels invisible to the people who should see her. That convergence of themes, invisibility, misrecognition, the gap between who you are and who the world believes you to be across the character, the performer, and the recipient of the song is either an extraordinary coincidence of alignment, or it is the show operating at its most sophisticated. Either way, the episode's emotional core is richer and stranger than any other guest star appearance in the show's history. The Leonard Nimoy appearances across the series are another category of layered guest star engagement. Nimoy appeared multiple times, and in each appearance, he brought with him the entire cultural weight of Mr. Spock of Star Trek, of the specific kind of earnest science fiction idealism that Trek represented. But Nimoy was always playing himself, not Spock, and the joke of his appearances was consistently about the relationship between an actor and the cultural significance of the character they played. The most famous Nimoy appearance is his narration of the Springfield Files episode, in which he provides a series of portentous intros and outros in the style of a supernatural documentary narrator, only to be cut off mid-sentence when the episode ends, breaking the fiction entirely. Nimoy's reading of that ending, his slightly wounded confusion at being interrupted, is one of the show's great comedic moments. But it's also a joke about exactly what Nimoy was. The man who lent his voice and face to something enormous, who became inseparable from that something, and who spent the rest of his career in a complicated negotiation with what he meant as a cultural object. The guest stars who became complicated in retrospect deserve consideration, because the show's relationship with those appearances tells you something about how it handles its own history. Some of the people who appeared on The Simpsons later had their public reputations damaged by revelations about their behavior. Some turned out to have held views that the show would never have endorsed. Some simply became people the show would no longer have invited if the invitation had come later. And those episodes remain in the archive, the guest star's voice and sometimes face preserved in 36 seconds of animation from a moment when the world thought differently about them. The show has addressed this in different ways at different times. Some episodes with problematic guests have been quietly retired from rotation. Others have been kept in circulation with the complicated weight of retrospective knowledge attached to them. The guest star archive is, among other things, a record of who was celebrated and when, and what happened to those celebrations later. It documents not just the show's taste in guests, but the culture's shifting judgments about who deserves that kind of celebration. The celebrity appearances that didn't happen are as interesting as the ones that did. The Simpsons has been in a position, for most of its run, to approach almost anyone and receive serious consideration. The list of people who declined and the reasons they gave is documented in production interviews and DVD commentaries, and it reveals something about what the show meant to different people. Some people declined because they found the show too subversive. Some declined because they didn't want their public image associated with animated comedy. Some declined because of the specific role they were being offered. They were willing to appear, but not in the context the writers had conceived. These declinations shaped the show in ways that are now invisible, because you can't see what didn't happen. But the decisions that got made around them, who to cast instead, how to restructure the episode, were shaped by each rejection. The guest stars who said no are part of the show's history even though they're not in the show. The sports stars who appeared form their own subcategory of the guest star phenomenon, and they tell a story about the show's relationship with sports that is different from its relationship with entertainment celebrities. Athletes tend to get different treatment on The Simpsons than actors or musicians. They're more often used for their physical association, for what their sport means and what their specific identity within that sport represents, than for their ability to perform. This means the athlete guest appearances are generally more tightly tied to specific episodes' themes. An appearance from a baseball star in a baseball episode, a basketball star in an episode about Bart's athletic ambitions. They're deployed as symbols as well as individuals. But the most interesting athlete appearances are the ones where the show uses the athlete to say something about the sport itself or about the culture around the sport. A footballer appearing in an episode about the economics of professional sports, lending their name and voice to a storyline that critiques the industry they work in. A basketball player appearing in an episode that examines race and athletic expectation in ways that their presence makes specifically pointed. The athlete's participation transforms the critique from abstract to embodied. Here is a person inside the system the episode is examining, lending their voice to that examination. The scientists and academics who appeared on The Simpsons form one of the most underappreciated groups in the guest star history. The show has always been committed to treating intellectual achievement as something worth celebrating, and across its run it has brought in some of the most accomplished scientists in the world to appear in episodes dealing with science. Stephen Hawking appeared multiple times. His appearances were written with a specific kind of care, aware that his public image combined extraordinary intellectual achievement with a physical reality that the show wanted to engage honestly rather than exploit. Hawking's willingness to engage with the show, including willingness to be part of jokes that acknowledged his celebrity rather than just his science, gave those appearances a generosity that made them work. The pattern of how the show depicts intellectual achievement through its guest scientists is consistent and warm. These are people doing genuinely important things, and the show is excited about that. The excitement is real. The show's writing staff, many of whom came from academic backgrounds, brought a genuine enthusiasm for intellectual achievement to those guest star appearances that shows up as something different from the show's usual relationship with celebrity. The scientists get episodes that are beneath the comedy, genuinely interested in what they know and how they know it. There is a specific phenomenon in The Simpsons guest star history that has been called the Simpsons cameo as cultural arrival. The idea that appearing on The Simpsons at a certain period of the show's cultural dominance was itself a marker of having achieved a specific kind of American cultural recognition. This was most true in the show's early Golden Age seasons, when the show's cultural position was so central that being invited onto it was a statement about where you stood in American culture. The guest stars from that period, the ones who appeared in seasons 3 through 8, were arriving at a moment when the show was the cultural event of the week, the thing everyone talked about on Monday. Being part of that conversation was different from being part of any other television conversation of the era. Those appearances existed in a specific cultural context that subsequent guest appearances, appearing on a legacy show rather than a cultural phenomenon, don't quite share. The show knows this. The later seasons' treatment of guest star appearances has been consistently more ironic and more self-aware about the nature of celebrity cameos than the early seasons were. The early seasons brought people in and gave them episodes. The later seasons sometimes bring people in to make jokes about the act of being a guest star, to use the guest star appearance as a platform for commenting on guest star appearances. This is the show's institutional self-awareness at work, and it produces a specific quality of meta-comedy that the early seasons couldn't have done, both because the tradition hadn't been established long enough to comment on, and because the show's cultural position is now different enough that the joke lands differently. 1,000 guest appearances across 36 years. A complete record of who The Simpsons thought was worth celebrating, inviting, engaging, satirizing, or in some cases gently eulogizing. It's a cultural archive in the shape of a comedy show, and the archive is denser and stranger and more revealing than it first appears. Section 7. The Treehouse of Horror Continuity. Every October since 1990, The Simpsons has departed from its usual rules. The Treehouse of Horror episodes' annual Halloween specials that the show runs in the autumn are presented as non-canonical, as stories happening outside the normal continuity of the show. Characters die. Physics break. The familiar inhabitants of Springfield encounter genuine horror, real supernatural forces, and the kind of consequences that the main show never allows. In the Treehouse universe, Homer can be killed and stay dead. Burns can genuinely triumph. The town can be destroyed in ways that stick until the closing credits. At least that's what the show says. The actual relationship between the Treehouse episodes and the show's main continuity is more complicated, more porous, and more interesting than the official non-canonical framing suggests. The Treehouse episodes have been leaking into the show's main continuity since their earliest installments, and the leaks run in multiple directions. The most straightforward version of this leakage is thematic. A horror element introduced in a Treehouse of Horror segment has a way of appearing, in modified or metaphorical form, in a later main episode. A monster from the Treehouse universe turns up as a gag in a regular episode. A supernatural power granted to a character in a Halloween segment resurfaces, briefly and without explanation, in an episode that is officially set in the show's real continuity. These are sometimes production-level callbacks, the animators reaching for a design that already exists in their archive, and sometimes something more deliberate. The Treehouse segments have given the show a visual vocabulary for the fantastic, the monstrous, and the surreal that the main show occasionally borrows from when it wants to push against its own realistic constraints. The Treehouse universe is a creative resource that the main show has rated across decades of production, but the continuity bleeding goes deeper than visual callbacks. Some of the Treehouse episodes have retroactively changed how you understand main continuity episodes that came before them, and this is where the relationship gets genuinely strange. In a mid-season Treehouse of Horror, a segment is structured as a direct continuation of an event that happened in a main continuity episode several seasons earlier. The horror segment doesn't acknowledge its connection to the main episode. It just begins from a point that makes sense only if you remember where the main episode left the characters. For viewers who remember the older episode, the Treehouse segment is playing a game. It's taking the real story and pushing it into horror territory, showing what that story might have become if the show had been willing to go there. For viewers who don't remember or haven't seen the older episode, it functions as a standalone horror story with a somewhat unexplained starting condition. This is exactly the kind of layered reference structure the show has built throughout its run, and finding it in the Treehouse episodes complicates these are non-canonical framing considerably. If a Treehouse segment explicitly references and extends a canonical episode, in what sense is the Treehouse segment purely separate from the canon? The question becomes more complicated when you consider the Treehouse episodes that have made predictions. Predictions, in the sense that they have depicted things in horror segment form that later appeared in main continuity episodes in more realistic form. A Treehouse segment from the early seasons depicted Homer dealing with a technology that had not yet been introduced in the main show. Within the horror segment's frame, the technology was played for unsettling effect. It was enabling something creepy. Several seasons later, that same technology appeared in a main continuity episode as an ordinary part of Springfield life, its creepiness domesticated into normalcy. The horror segment was showing you what the technology did. The main episode showed you what the technology became after Springfield accepted it. This is a remarkably sophisticated structural choice, whether or not it was fully intentional. The Treehouse universe as horror test kitchen, a place where things that would eventually enter Springfield's mainstream can first appear in their most alarming form, so that when they arrive in the main show, the audience already has a subconscious experience of what those things do when pushed to their extreme. The Treehouse deaths deserve specific attention because they are, in a formal sense, the only genuine deaths in the Simpsons universe. Characters die in main episodes, but those deaths are reset. Characters die in Treehouse episodes, and the show is honest that those deaths count for the duration of the episode but not beyond it. The Treehouse death is a genuine death that is bounded by the episode's horror frame. This creates a category of emotional experience unique to the Treehouse episodes. When Homer dies in a Treehouse segment, the death is real within the segment. It follows the logic of the horror story being told, not the logic of the main show's perpetual reset. You experience the death as a death in a way that the show's main continuity never quite allows. And because the characters are the same characters you watch in the main show, these deaths carry real emotional weight that pure fantasy characters wouldn't have. The cumulative effect of watching a beloved character die, genuinely and with consequence, across multiple Treehouse episodes over multiple decades, is a kind of practiced grief. You get to experience losing Homer, or Bart, or Marge, in the bounded safety of a horror story, and that experience does something to how you relate to those characters in the main show. You know they're mortal, even if they're not allowed to be mortal. The Treehouse episodes keep demonstrating it. There are 3 specific Treehouse episodes that the fan community considers essential viewing, not for their horror content, but for what they reveal about the show's own understanding of itself. The first is the segment that directly parodies the show's floating timeline, placing the family in a horror scenario where time itself is the monster, and the horror is the experience of watching people you love stay frozen while the world ages around them. It's a Treehouse horror segment, in which the primary source of dread is the thing the main show does every episode. The horror is the show's own structural premise, held up and examined as though it were a nightmare rather than a convenience. The second is a segment that parodies the relationship between the show and its audience, depicting Springfield residents who become aware that they are observed and begin performing for an invisible audience. The horror of the segment is the horror of being watched, of having your private life be someone else's entertainment, of existing primarily as an object of observation rather than as a subject of experience. This is, of course, the existential condition of every character in every television show, and the Treehouse segment makes that condition visible and frightening in a way the main show cannot afford to do. The third is a segment that is, structurally, the most meta piece of television the show has ever produced. It depicts the animated characters of The Simpsons becoming aware of the fact that they are animated, that they exist inside a drawing, that the world they inhabit is made of lines and color fills and frame rates. The horror of the segment is the horror of the void underneath the animation, the blankness that exists between frames, the fact that the characters are not continuous but episodic, that they exist in flashes and are nothing in the spaces between. It's an animated horror story about what it is to be animated. These are the episodes where the Treehouse format gives the show permission to examine its own nature at a level that would destroy the show if done in the main continuity. Horror is the frame that makes the examination safe. You can look directly at the nightmare of what the show is, can depict it honestly, can let it be frightening, because the horror frame promises that when it's over, you'll go back to the regular show. The horror is contained. The examination is permitted precisely because it's labeled as something that isn't real. The Treehouse of Horror episodes, taken as a complete archive across 35-plus installments, form a parallel text to the main show that is darker, more honest about certain things, and structurally more adventurous than anything the main show attempts. They are the place where the show goes when it has something to say that doesn't fit inside a comedy. They are the show's shadow self, released once a year, in October, when the rules are temporarily suspended. And the shadow has been leaking into the main show since the beginning. The background character universe. Springfield is populated, not in the vague sense that a fictional town is understood to have citizens beyond its named cast, but in a specific, carefully maintained, visually articulated way. The background of The Simpsons is full of people who have been drawn with enough specificity to be individuals, who appear often enough to be residents, and who, on the occasions when the show chooses to look at them directly, turn out to have interior lives that the background has been suggesting for years. Hans Moleman is the most extreme and most beloved example of this phenomenon, and he deserves extended treatment before we examine the larger background character universe. Hans Moleman is Springfield's resident sufferer. He is small, ancient-seeming, nearly blind, and in continuous danger from the world around him. He has been struck by vehicles, buried, fallen into things, been the victim of animal attacks, inadvertently used as a prop in dangerous situations, and subjected to the kind of physical catastrophe that would, in reality, result in immediate death on every occasion. And he keeps coming back. Moleman's physical description within the show, including his own testimony that he is 31 years old, creates a portrait of a man whose relationship with time and his body is deeply abnormal. He appears decades older than 31. His physical fragility is extreme beyond what any 31-year-old's biology would produce. Either Moleman is lying about his age, which seems unnecessary given his circumstances, or something has happened to him that the show never explains and never intends to explain. What Moleman does functionally is serve as Springfield's measure of how indifferent the town is to individual suffering. When Moleman gets hurt, nobody helps. When Moleman dies, nobody investigates. When Moleman reappears, nobody asks how he survived. He is the test case for Springfield's collective capacity for compassion, and the answer that test case keeps producing is extremely limited. Springfield watches Moleman suffer with the same passive acceptance it applies to everything else that should alarm it. He is suffering in the background, and the background is where Springfield keeps the things it has decided not to notice. There is a specific episode, brief and mostly overlooked, in which Moleman is given something approximating an interior life. He is shown in a moment outside his usual context of suffering, engaged in a quiet activity that suggests a private self that is separate from his public role as Springfield's designated victim. The moment passes quickly. The show doesn't develop it, but it's there, and it changes Moleman from pure gag to something more. He has a life when we're not watching. The suffering is not the totality of his experience. He exists when the camera isn't on him, and what he does when the camera isn't on him is something the show briefly, compassionately acknowledged. Disco Stu is a character who appears in the background of Springfield for many seasons before the show ever gives him dialogue or a storyline. His visual design, the retro disco wardrobe, the medallion, the carefully maintained period-specific styling suggests a man who has organized his entire identity around a cultural moment that ended decades ago. He is a museum piece living in Springfield's present, dressed for a night that already happened, still waiting. When the show finally gives Disco Stu real scenes, what emerges is a man who knows exactly how he looks to other people and has decided that their judgment is less important than his commitment. He is not delusional about the world having moved on. He is aware. He has simply decided that where he is, aesthetically and emotionally, is where he is going to stay. There is something admirable in this that the show handles with genuine warmth. Disco Stu is ridiculous, yes. He is also the only person in Springfield who has chosen a complete aesthetic identity and maintained it with perfect consistency across decades of cultural change. In a town defined by its collective amnesia, Disco Stu's perfect memory of who he decided to be is almost radical. The background of Moe's Tavern contains several regulars who have never been formally named or given dialogue, but who appear with enough consistency to feel like full residents of the show's universe. The man with the peculiar hat who occupies the same stool in the back corner of Moe's. The woman who is always at the end of the bar and who has, across hundreds of crowd shots, been shown reacting to the conversations around her, with a range of expressions that suggest she has strong opinions and has simply chosen never to express them. The elderly couple who appear together in every crowd scene at the bar, who are always seated identically, always turned toward each other at the same angle, always engaged in what appears to be the same conversation, a long, ongoing conversation that the show has been documenting in the background for 36 years without ever letting us hear what it's about. These background regulars are the show's way of saying that Springfield is a real place. Real places have people in them who aren't the main characters of your story. They have their own conversations, their own histories, their own ongoing concerns. The background of The Simpsons has been populated with enough specificity to feel inhabited rather than decorated. The Springfield Elementary background students deserve their own examination because the show has been quietly developing them in the background of school scenes for 3 decades. Database and the group of students who cluster around Lisa in academic settings have appeared consistently enough that fans have given them identities and even backstories based purely on their visual appearances and the rare lines they're given. Database, whose name comes from one of the few lines he's ever been given, appears in almost every Springfield Elementary crowd scene. He occupies the same social niche in every appearance, adjacent to Lisa's intelligence but excluded from her emotional world, part of the school's intellectual subset but not the confidant she needs. The bully ecosystem at Springfield Elementary is similarly well developed in the background. Nelson's relationship with Jimbo, Carney, and Dolph is documented across crowd scenes and background interactions in ways that suggest a hierarchy and a history that the show's occasional Nelson-focused episodes only touch. In the background of episodes not about bullying, the dynamics of Springfield's youth criminal element play out with enough consistency to constitute their own ongoing narrative. The Springfield mob deserves specific attention because it is one of the background character groups that the show has most extensively developed without ever making that development the primary focus of an episode. Springfield has a functioning organized crime presence. Fat Tony D'Amico is the named figure at its head, and he has appeared in enough episodes to be considered a secondary recurring character. But the mob's background presence, visible in crowd scenes and non-plot related appearances, suggests an organization considerably larger and more integrated into Springfield's economy and society than any individual episode focused on it would suggest. The mob appears at town meetings. Mob members are visible at community events. Fat Tony's crew attends school functions, frequents local businesses, participates in the ordinary social life of Springfield alongside the residents they presumably exploit. This integration is a joke, the casual way the show treats organized crime as just another Springfield institution, but it's also a portrait of how organized crime actually functions in communities where it's been established long enough not as an alien force operating outside normal social structures, but as a set of relationships, embedded in those structures, familiar enough to become background noise. The database of background character deaths is one of the show's more disturbing accumulations. Characters who have appeared consistently in the background, who have built up enough visual presence to feel like real residents of Springfield, have died in the course of episodes and then reappeared in subsequent episodes without explanation. This is partly production consistency. Maintaining perfect continuity for every background character across hundreds of episodes is not practical. But the frequency and visibility of some of these background deaths, followed by apparently unexplained resurrections, is something the show has clearly been aware of and has occasionally acknowledged. The most significant background character development, in terms of what it reveals about the show's ambitions, is the show's treatment of Barney Gumble. Barney begins the series as a pure background character. He's the town drunk. He sits at Moe's. He makes a mess. He provides a social comparison point that makes Homer look somewhat more functional by contrast. He is the bottom of the visible social hierarchy in the show's starting position. And across seasons, something extraordinary happens to Barney in the background. He is given a history. A moment of genuine talent and ambition is revealed. He was smart once. He had prospects once. Something specific happened to derail him. He is given relationships that have real emotional weight. His alcoholism is depicted, eventually, with a degree of seriousness that acknowledges it as a genuine condition rather than purely a comedic beat. And in an episode that most fans consider one of the series' quietly great achievements, Barney gets sober. He stays sober for multiple episodes. He changes. His relationship with the other characters changes. The show depicts sobriety not as a triumphant ending, but as an ongoing condition that requires maintenance and that changes a person's relationship with everything around them, including the relationships that were formed around the drinking. And then the show eventually reverses this because the ongoing Barney who doesn't drink is a different character, and the show needs the background character who does drink. But the arc exists. It happened. And the fact that it happened to a background character, a pure comedy supporting player, who was initially defined by a single characteristic, says something about the show's belief that even its most background figures have the capacity for a full human story. The background character universe of The Simpsons is the show's quiet argument that the world is full of people worth paying attention to, that the people in the margins of any story have their own stories, and that occasionally, briefly, it's worth turning the camera and looking at who's been there the whole time. Section 9. The Simpsons and Real Science. One of the most unexpected things about The Simpsons. Unexpected because it is in such apparent tension with a show that is primarily known for Homer eating donuts and Bart saying, "Eat my shorts," is the degree to which it engages with real science, with genuine seriousness and real accuracy. This is documented most extensively in the mathematical content, but it extends throughout the show's engagement with physics, biology, chemistry, and the broader scientific enterprise. The show has, across 36 seasons, been quietly making the case that science is interesting, that mathematics is beautiful, and that the people who do those things are worth spending time with. The mathematics in The Simpsons begins with the writing staff. Multiple writers on the show have advanced academic backgrounds in mathematics and science, and they have consistently found ways to embed real mathematical content in the show's jokes and background details. Simon Singh, a science writer who co-authored a book about the mathematics hidden in The Simpsons, documented dozens of specific mathematical references across the show's run, ranging from brief background jokes requiring specific mathematical knowledge to extended sequences built around real mathematical concepts. The most significant mathematical moment in the show, and the one most frequently discussed, appears in a Season 6 episode called Treehouse of Horror 6, in the segment titled Homer Cubed, when Homer steps through a dimensional portal into three-dimensional space. The environment around him is covered in mathematical equations. Among these equations is an apparent counterexample to Fermat's last theorem, which states that there are no whole number solutions to the equation x, n plus y, n equals z, n for values of n greater than 2. The equation visible in Homer cubed appears to be a counterexample. To this theorem, it appears to show three whole numbers that satisfy the equation for n equals 3. David X. Cohen, one of the show's writers who holds advanced degrees in mathematics and computer science, embedded this equation deliberately. The catch is that the equation is not actually a counterexample. The numbers chosen appear to work if calculated approximately, but fail when calculated with full mathematical precision. The equation is a mathematical joke. It looks like it disproves Fermat's last theorem, but it doesn't, which is exactly the kind of joke a mathematician makes. Fermat's last theorem was, at the time the episode aired, one of the most famous unsolved problems in mathematics. Andrew Wiles had proven it in 1994, and the proof was still being verified by the mathematical community. The joke was embedding a false counterexample to a theorem that had just been proven, in a context where most viewers wouldn't notice it was there, for the subset of the audience who would recognize it as a mathematical gag. This is the show being brilliant at a level most of its audience will never access, for the pleasure of the few who will. That commitment to embedding real intellectual content for the people who can recognize it, without ever making the main joke dependent on that content, is one of the defining characteristics of The Simpsons at its best. The physics in The Simpsons is similarly engaged. The show has not maintained perfect physical accuracy. This is animation, and animation makes liberties with physics as a matter of visual storytelling. But when the show chooses to engage with actual physical concepts, it does so with a seriousness that goes well beyond what the comedic context requires. The episode that most thoroughly engages with real physics is, arguably, the PTA Disbands, in which Lisa's educational anxieties provide context for an extended exploration of what happens to a community's scientific culture when educational institutions fail. The episode is a comedy about a school strike. It is also a meditation on the relationship between scientific education and scientific culture, on how quickly the pipeline from children learning science to society having scientists can be disrupted, and on what is lost when that pipeline fails. This is an ambition that goes beyond what most television comedies attempt. The show is using a school strike plot to say something real about how scientific knowledge is transmitted and sustained in a culture. And it embeds this in comedy well enough that the satirical content and the comedic content serve each other rather than competing. The biology in The Simpsons is most visible in the show's treatment of evolution, genetics, and the human body. in ways that sometimes use comedy to say something accurate and sometimes use comedy to explore what would happen if biology worked differently than it does. Homer's physical resilience, which has been discussed in other contexts, is given a biological explanation in at least one episode. Homer is said to have an unusual skull structure and separately to have neurological atypicality and separately to have survived so many head injuries that his brain has adapted to trauma in ways that would be impossible in standard biological terms. The show accumulates these explanations across multiple episodes, and together they form a semi-consistent biological portrait of Homer as someone whose physical biology has been genuinely altered by his environment and history. The chemistry of Springfield is a subject that the show engages with most directly through the nuclear power plant, but that extends into other areas in ways worth noting. The show depicts chemical processes with varying degrees of accuracy, sometimes getting them right, sometimes departing from reality for comedic or narrative purposes. But the departures are generally either deliberate exaggerations of real chemistry or inventions that follow consistent internal rules within the show's universe. The squeezie's chemistry is never explained, which is appropriate, but the show's general treatment of food chemistry, pharmaceutical chemistry, and industrial chemistry reflects a writing staff that understood what those things were, even when choosing to exaggerate or ignore them. The scientific guest appearances are where the show's engagement with real science becomes most explicit. Stephen Hawking, as noted, appeared multiple times. In those appearances, the show handled the science seriously. Hawking's character discussed real cosmological concepts. The show didn't play his scientific knowledge as a joke or use it as mere credentialing. It engaged with what he actually knew and thought, in comedy form, with real respect for the content. The Nobel Prize appearance is worth noting. The show has depicted Nobel Prize-winning scientists in ways that engage with their actual work, and the episodes that feature those appearances are among the most scientifically literate pieces of mainstream American comedy television ever produced. They demonstrate that you can be funny about science without being dismissive of it, that humor and intellectual seriousness can coexist, that a joke about a mathematical theorem is funnier if the theorem is real. There is a specific moment in the show's history where it made a prediction, genuinely made a prediction that was later confirmed by real science, and it's worth distinguishing this from the broader predictions phenomenon discussed elsewhere in this video. In an episode from the early seasons, Homer proposes an idea about the shape of the universe that, while framed as Homer being foolish, contains within it a specific mathematical model. That model, when taken seriously, corresponds to a topological structure called a 3-torus. Years later, cosmological research identified radiation patterns in the cosmic microwave background that are consistent with a universe that has this topological structure. The show didn't predict this the way it might claim to have predicted other things. It didn't predict specific events. What it did was include, in a comedic context, a real mathematical model for the universe's shape, proposed as a joke by a character not intended to be taken seriously, that later turned out to correspond to what real astrophysics found. The mathematician who put that model in Homer's mouth knew it was a real model. They put a real mathematical idea into a comedy context, and then the universe, cooperatively, turned out to work that way. There's a wonderful absurdity in that the cosmos validating Homer Simpson's donut-shaped universe hypothesis. What the show's scientific engagement reveals, most fundamentally, is a commitment to intellectual honesty. The show believes that the world is interesting and complicated, and that understanding how it works is one of the most rewarding things a person can do. This belief exists underneath the comedy and survives every joke Homer makes about science being boring. The jokes about science are funny because the people writing them understand what they're joking about. The understanding is the prerequisite for the comedy, and it's never fully hidden. The science is in there, doing its quiet work, for everyone who knows to look. Section 10. The long game details planted seasons early. The most extraordinary thing about the storytelling in The Simpsons, the thing that most rewards the kind of obsessive, long-form viewing that the show's 36-year run makes possible, is the degree to which it plants information, setups, and character details seasons or even decades before they pay off. This is not the same as the general principle of narrative foreshadowing, which is a basic craft of storytelling. What The Simpsons does is something more ambitious and more strange. It embeds details in early episodes that function perfectly well as incidental details in those episodes, that require no specific attention or interpretation, but that retrospectively reveal themselves years later as the setup for something the show was always building toward. The most famous example of this is also the most debated, the arc of Sideshow Bob. Bob first appears in Season 1 as Krusty's sidekick, a secondary character in a Krusty-focused plot who is revealed to have framed Krusty for a crime Bob himself committed. The episode resolves, Bob goes to prison, and life goes on. But the episode, in establishing Bob's character, plants a seed that the show would tend for years. Bob is brilliant, cultured, contemptuous of vulgarity, and specifically enraged by the entertainment industry's embrace of lowest common denominator content. He framed Krusty because he wanted Krusty's show and believed he could do better. His first appearance is a statement about what Bob's story is going to be about: the collision between genuine refinement and a world that prefers Krusty. This setup sits quietly in the archive until Bob's first return appearance, and then again in his next return, and the next, accumulating across seasons into one of the show's richest character studies. Each Bob appearance adds detail to the portrait that the first episode established. Each reveals something new about what it means to be exactly this kind of person: overqualified, underappreciated, genuinely talented, genuinely dangerous in a world organized around the kind of entertainment you despise. The retrospective reading of Bob's first episode, in light of everything his character becomes, is completely different from the reading available in the moment of its first airing. In 1990, Bob was a one-episode villain who happened to be well-voiced and unusually characterized. In retrospect, he was the introduction of a character whose ongoing story would be the show's most sustained exploration of cultural frustration and the violence it can produce. The first season plants another seed that takes years to sprout: the relationship between Homer and his father, and specifically the nature of what Abe Simpson has and hasn't told Homer about his own history. In early Abe appearances, the character is established as a rambling, somewhat self-absorbed old man who tells stories that may or may not be accurate and who has a complicated and emotionally remote relationship with his son. This is played for comedy. Abe's unreliability as a narrator is a source of jokes. His distance from Homer is background texture. Across subsequent seasons, this setup is revealed to be doing serious work. The comedic unreliability turns out to be covering genuine secrets. The emotional distance between Abe and Homer turns out to have specific causes. The man who has been positioned as a comedy character, eccentric and unreliable and somewhat pathetic, turns out to be someone who has made choices with real consequences, who has protected things from Homer that Homer needed to know, who has a history more complicated than the comedy surface suggested. Season 7's revelation about Mona Simpson, which we've discussed elsewhere, is the largest single payoff of the setup laid in Season 1 and 2. Abe's stories about Homer's mother have been inconsistent since Abe's earliest appearances. He tells different things in different contexts, remembers differently, characterizes her differently. This inconsistency is, in the early seasons, just Abe being Abe, unreliable, elderly, prone to self-contradiction. But once the Mona episodes reveal that Abe has been deliberately hiding the truth about Homer's mother for decades, every inconsistency in his earlier stories retrospectively becomes deliberate obfuscation. He wasn't confused, he was protecting a lie. And the setup for that revelation was laid across multiple seasons of comedy Abe unreliability before it was ever developed as something serious. The Burns-Simpson family connection, which is one of the show's most profound and most sustained long-game plots, demonstrates this better than almost any other example. The connection isn't revealed in a single episode. It's assembled across multiple seasons, with pieces arriving in different episodes that don't initially appear to be part of the same story. In Season 3, there is an offhand reference to Burns's industrial history that plants information about the scope of his business interests before the show makes specific use of that information. In Season 5, a character mentions the town's history with Burns in a way that suggests deeper roots than the current narrative requires. In Season 7, the Mona Simpson revelation connects Burns specifically to Homer's family history for the first time in a way that is explicit and devastating. But the connection was always there, in the background, being built one detail at a time across the seasons. Burns isn't just Homer's boss. Burns is someone whose history intersects with Homer's family's history in a way that predates Homer's employment at the plant by decades. The show knew this from early on. It just took years to reveal how deep the roots went. The Maggie intelligence arc is the show's longest-running example of planted information. From her very first appearances, Maggie is drawn with something in her face that goes beyond what you'd expect from a baby depicted as the family's silent, peripheral member. The animators gave her expressiveness that is specific and knowing. Her reactions to the world around her, visible in background shots and brief cutaways, are the reactions of someone who understands what she's watching, rather than someone who is simply present for it. This is planted in Season 1. It sits in the background for seasons. It is occasionally referenced in jokes that are funny because they suggest Maggie is smarter than expected, but the jokes pass quickly and the main show moves on. The longest daycare short, the shooting of Burns, the various glimpses of Maggie's extraordinary cognitive capability, these are the payoffs of a setup that has been running since the show's first episode. The show has been telling you who Maggie is from the beginning. It took years to show you how true it was. The history of Moe's Tavern is another example of long-planted information. Moe's backstory, revealed in pieces across many seasons, includes details that are introduced casually as comedy elements long before they become part of his character's serious portrait. His boxing history, his failed attempts at other professions, the specific quality of his failure that keeps him behind that bar, these are seeded across seasons as incidental jokes about Moe being pathetic, and then assembled, eventually, into a portrait of a genuinely sad person whose sadness has a real architecture. The show plants these details without announcement. It doesn't signal that this is set up for something. It introduces information in the context of whatever the current episode needs, and then it keeps that information available. It remembers what it planted, and seasons later it returns for the harvest. This is the opposite of the reset that the show is often accused of. The reset happens between episodes on the surface level. The house is intact, the family is fine, the catastrophe of last week's episode is forgotten. But underneath that surface reset, the show has been maintaining an archive of planted information, a library of seeds, growing slowly across seasons and years. The most beautiful version of this phenomenon is the way the show handles the emotional development of Homer and Marge's marriage. Individual episodes might reset a fight resolved, a threat to the marriage survived, the couple intact again at the end of the episode. But across the full run of the series, the marriage has been developing. The specific knowledge Homer and Marge have of each other, the specific language of their relationship, the particular ways they fight and the particular ways they reconcile, have been accumulating across hundreds of episodes into something that is genuinely a portrait of a long marriage. Not because any single episode tells you it is, but because the archive of episodes, watched together, shows you a relationship that has been grown and maintained and occasionally damaged and repaired across 3 decades. The detail planted in Season 2 that will pay off in Season 25. The joke in Season 4 that becomes a serious revelation in Season 12. The character trait introduced in Season 1 that becomes the key to understanding an episode in Season 30. These are the things that make The Simpsons unlike anything else that has ever been on television, not because any single episode is unprecedented, but because the accumulation of episodes across 36 years has produced something that couldn't have been planned in total, but that reveals, on examination, a coherence that goes deeper than coincidence. It's a story being told across decades. It's being told in the background of the jokes. And it's still being told right now, in whatever episode aired most recently, planting something for future seasons to harvest. That's the long game. That's the patience built into the show at its most ambitious level. Not the patience of a single season arc, but the patience of a story that has been willing to wait 30 years for its setups to pay off, in the confidence that the audience, or at least some part of the audience, will still be there when the moment comes. And we have been. We are still there, we're still watching, still noticing, still finding things in the background that were put there years ago for exactly this moment. That's The Simpsons. Not just a comedy, not just a long-running show. A world built with enough care and enough patience and enough accumulated detail that exploring it honestly, exploring it at the level of what's actually there rather than what's in the foreground, requires something like 4 hours, and even then we've barely started. Section 11. The Architecture of Springfield. A town is not just its people, it's its buildings, its streets, the physical organization of its space, and the logic or illogic by which its spaces are arranged. Springfield as a physical place has been built, rebuilt, expanded, contradicted, and revised across 36 years. And the physical Springfield that emerges from all of that construction is one of the most fascinating built environments in fictional history. The power plant is the obvious starting point, because it dominates the physical landscape of Springfield in every establishing shot. The cooling towers are visible from virtually every outdoor scene in the town. They are the skyline. They define the silhouette. No matter where you are in Springfield, the cooling towers are visible on the horizon, always slightly wrong, always slightly too close, always present in a way that prevents you from ever forgetting what they are and what they do. This is intentional. The production design of the show places the power plant in sightlines that a realistic geography wouldn't produce. The plant is visible from the school, from the residential neighborhood, from the highway, from the downtown area, from the beach in episodes where Springfield has a beach. The plant should not be visible from all of these locations. A real town with a nuclear plant has the plant in one place, visible from certain angles but not omnipresent. Springfield's plant is omnipresent. It is always watching. It is the built environment's permanent reminder that everything in this town happens in the shadow of what that facility does and doesn't do. The cooling towers aren't background detail. They are foreground statement, present in every shot where the outside of a building is visible, insisting on their presence in a way that the town's residents have learned to ignore, and the viewer has learned to forget, because they're always there. The Simpson house at 742 Evergreen Terrace exists within a neighborhood that has its own visual character. The Flanders house next door is always slightly better maintained, slightly more ordered, slightly more correct in its presentation, which is the visual statement of Ned Flanders' character made architectural. The Flanders house is what the Simpson house aspires to look like and doesn't quite achieve. The geometry of the neighborhood, the relationship between the houses, the positioning of the yards, the sightlines between living room windows has been carefully maintained across seasons in ways that create a physical grammar for the relationship between the families. Homer can see Ned's yard from his kitchen window. Ned can see the Simpson family through their living room window. The surveillance is mutual and casual, the natural architecture of suburban proximity. Springfield Elementary is drawn with a physical design that communicates its institutional psychology. It is large enough to be institutional and small enough to feel personal. Its hallways are long and slightly oppressive. Its classrooms slightly too small for the number of students they contain. Its administrative spaces slightly too prominent relative to educational spaces. The building's architecture privileges control over learning, which is a visual argument about what the institution actually prioritizes. The cafeteria at Springfield Elementary, visible in background shots throughout the school set episodes, is one of the show's most detailed recurring locations. The lunch choices available on the counter, the state of the food preparation equipment, the condition of the tables, these details accumulate across hundreds of background appearances into a portrait of school food that is both comedy and social commentary. The food available at Springfield Elementary is exactly as bad as every American who attended a public school in the 1990s remembers their school food being. The specificity of the badness is research quality. Whoever designed those background shots had either a very good memory for institutional food or direct experience of it. Downtown Springfield has a character that shifts between episodes in ways that reflect the show's evolving understanding of what American downtowns look like. In early seasons, Springfield's downtown has more vitality, more density, more of the character of a functional urban center. In later seasons, the downtown spaces show more vacancy, more shuttered storefronts, more of the visual language of economic decline that became visible in American smaller cities from the 90s onward. The show didn't make a narrative out of this change. It didn't episode any plots that addressed Springfield's downtown decline. The change just happened in the background, accumulating across seasons in the storefronts, visible behind characters walking down Main Street. If you watch those background storefronts across the full run of the show, you watch Springfield's downtown economy slowly erode, the way actual American small city downtowns eroded, unannounced and without drama. The Quickie Mart's physical location within Springfield is one of the show's most consistent pieces of geography. Apu's store is always in the same place relative to other landmarks. It's on the way between the Simpson house and numerous other locations. It is architecturally positioned as the thing you pass on the way to other things, which is exactly how a convenience store works. It is not a destination, it is a stop. Something you encounter in transit, and its physical placement in Springfield reflects this function, putting it in the path of characters who are going somewhere else, making it available for characters who need something on the way. Springfield's churches, hospitals, and municipal buildings tell the story of a town that has institutional infrastructure but doesn't trust it. Springfield General Hospital appears in dozens of episodes, and in virtually every appearance it is depicted as understaffed, underfunded, and operated with a level of professional competence that barely meets the definition of medical care. The building looks like a hospital. It has the physical vocabulary of a medical institution, and inside that vocabulary, things happen that no actual medical institution would permit. The First Church of Springfield, where Reverend Lovejoy presides, is depicted with enough architectural detail to feel real, but with a spiritual emptiness that is the visual statement of Lovejoy's character. The church looks like a church. It performs churchness with appropriate exterior detail and interior arrangement, but the warmth that should inhabit a building dedicated to communal religious experience is consistently absent from the visual treatment. The First Church of Springfield looks correct and feels hollow, which is exactly Lovejoy's problem. He has the forms right and something essential is missing. Moe's Tavern's physical space is the most carefully designed interior in the show outside the Simpson house itself, and it rewards close examination. The bar counter is always positioned in the same relationship to the door, creating a specific path for characters entering the space. The bottles behind Moe are consistent across seasons in their general arrangement, though specific bottles change. The space has the quality of an environment that hasn't changed in decades because nothing in Moe's life has changed in decades. The tavern is physically static in a way that reflects the emotional stasis of everyone who inhabits it. The ceiling of Moe's is something that background watchers have spent time examining, because across multiple seasons, the ceiling of Moe's Tavern shows signs of water damage, structural irregularity, and what appear to be the traces of modifications made to the space over many decades of use. The ceiling tells a history that nobody in the bar ever discusses. It is the physical record of everything the building has been through, visible above the heads of people who never look up. There are specific locations in Springfield that appear in only 1 or 2 episodes and yet are drawn with enough visual specificity to feel like real places. A house on the edge of town that appears in a single episode dealing with a specific character's backstory. A business that functions as the location for one scene and is never referenced again. A public space that exists specifically to provide the environment for a single plot point. These spaces, drawn once and forgotten, are the show's way of saying that Springfield is large enough to have places the main characters never go. That the town extends beyond the boundaries of the narrative into genuinely unexplored territory. The gorge outside Springfield is one of these peripheral spaces that has accumulated significance across the series through repeated reference. Homer falls into it. Bart has misadventures near it. Characters threaten to throw things into it. The gorge is Springfield's wilderness, its edge, the place where the town's domesticity ends and something more primal begins. It appears in dozens of episodes, always slightly different in its visual treatment, always retaining the same essential character. The place outside town where consequences can't be entirely controlled. The gorge, if you track its appearances across the series, is also consistently positioned slightly outside the map of Springfield that the show otherwise maintains. Characters travel to the gorge from various starting points across town, and the travel time is inconsistent. The gorge is always about the same subjective distance from wherever the characters currently are, the distance of a bit outside town, a narrative distance more than a physical one. It exists at the edge of Springfield the way the edge exists in any story, as the boundary between the safe and familiar and whatever lies beyond. The physical Springfield is a place made of real locations that don't quite add up to a consistent geography. Every building is specific and realized. The relationships between them don't hold. The town is a collection of places that can't exist in the same space simultaneously, but that all feel true individually. It is built the way memory builds a childhood town, rich in individual locations, unreliable in the distances and directions between them, true in its texture and false in its map. Section 12. What the show knows about itself. There is a version of The Simpsons that exists outside any individual episode. It's the version assembled from 36 years of accumulated detail, from the background details and the planted setups and the musical signatures and the character design evolution and the guest star archive and the Treehouse of Horror continuity and the Springfield architecture and all the rest. That version of the show is the one this video has been building toward. The show as a complete object rather than as a series of episodes. The show is something that knows what it is in ways that no individual episode can fully express. The Simpsons knows what it is. This is the most remarkable thing about it, and the thing that distinguishes it from every other long-running show that has ever aired. Most long-running shows eventually lose track of themselves. They forget why they started. They continue out of inertia rather than intention. The original premise becomes a constraint rather than a foundation. The Simpsons has never quite done this, despite providing abundant evidence that it should have. It has had bad stretches. It has had seasons that felt like a show running on fumes. It has made decisions that fan communities have found catastrophic and that the show itself has occasionally acknowledged and apologized for. But underneath all of that, underneath the bad seasons and the controversial episodes and the long-running debates about when it stopped being good, the show has maintained an awareness of itself that is visible in how it references its own history, in how it handles the material that defines it, in how it continues to plant information in backgrounds that only the longest-term viewers will ever find. The self-awareness shows up most directly in the meta-episodes. The show has, multiple times across its run, made episodes that are explicitly about the nature of the show, about what it means to be a cartoon family, about the experience of watching the same characters for decades, about the relationship between the people making the show and the audience watching it. These episodes are always risky and almost always remarkable. They are the show stepping outside its own frame and examining what the frame is. In these moments, the show demonstrates that it has been thinking about the same questions its most devoted fans have been thinking about. Questions about aging and repetition and what it means to care about fictional characters over a very long time. Questions about the show's own legacy and what that legacy has done to American culture and what American culture has done to the show. The show's answer to these questions, its consistent answer across every time it has addressed them, is that the questions matter, that they're worth asking, that there is something real being examined when a viewer sits down with episodes they've seen before and finds something new in them. That the investment of attention and time is not wasted even when the individual episode doesn't fully justify it, because the accumulation of attention across 36 years produces something that the individual episode can't. That something is what this video has been about. The world built in the background, the story told beneath the surface, the details planted for decades in the confidence that someone, eventually, would find them. You found them. Or rather, you were open to finding them, which, in the context of The Simpsons, amounts to the same thing. You were willing to look at the background, to pay attention to the margins, to take seriously the possibility that what was in the corner of the frame was worth the same attention as what was in the center. That's the relationship the show has always been trying to build with its most attentive viewers. Not just people who watch, but people who look. Not just people who laugh, but people who ask why the laugh lands the way it does. Not just people who enjoy the show, but people who are curious about what's underneath the enjoyment. The Simpsons has been rewarding that curiosity for 36 years. Every episode, in every frame, in every background detail and musical signature and character design choice and planted detail, the show has been saying, there's more here. There's more if you want it. There's a whole other level of this thing, and it's yours if you come looking. It's a remarkable offer. Sustained across 36 years and close to 800 episodes, in the background of the longest-running animated show in American television history. And it will still be there the next time you watch. More than you noticed last time. More than you'll notice this time. Always a little more. That's Springfield. That's the whole point. See you in the next episode. End of script. Total estimated word count, 42,000. 500 plus words. Section 2. The food and drink codes. Food is everywhere in The Simpsons. It fills kitchen tables and fast food trays and vending machines in Homer's pockets and the refrigerator that Homer opens approximately 900 times across 36 seasons without ever quite finding the specific thing he was looking for. Food in The Simpsons is so omnipresent that it disappears into the scenery. It becomes furniture, it becomes background. That is exactly when you should start paying closest attention to it. Because the food in The Simpsons is never just food, it is a language. A system of meaning running beneath the dialogue and the plot, expressing things about character and mood and social class and the particular anxieties of American domestic life that the show rarely says directly. The food tells you who these people are in ways that their words sometimes cannot or will not. Start with Homer. Homer's relationship with food is one of the most thoroughly documented behavioral patterns in all of fiction. He eats constantly, voraciously, and with a tolerance for quality that approaches the complete absence of standards. He eats foods that the show depicts as objectively dangerous. He eats leftover pizza from the trash. He eats a decade-old sandwich found behind the refrigerator. He eats an amount of candy that would hospitalize anyone with functioning taste aversion. He eats when he is happy, when he is sad, when he is bored, when he is celebrating, and when he is grieving. Homer's eating never stops. And here is the detail that the comedy tends to obscure. Homer's eating never seems to provide the satisfaction it keeps promising. He finishes one food and immediately, reflexively, reaches for the next. There is a specific look that crosses his face in quieter moments, after he finishes eating something not the cartoonishly blissful expression of the comedic beat, but something more complicated in the eyes. He finished the food. The thing that was making him feel something is gone now. The feeling was the eating, not the being fed. This behavior is funny. It is designed to be funny. But it is also a portrait of a particular relationship with comfort that many people who use food as a primary emotional regulation mechanism would recognize. Homer does not eat because he is hungry. He eats because something else is missing and food is immediately available in a way that other satisfactions are not. His eating is an attempt to fill something that food cannot fill, repeated endlessly because the filling never quite works. The donut is the central symbol of all of this. Homer's relationship with donuts is so thoroughly established that it has become cultural shorthand for the character worldwide. But the specific visual of the donut, the circular pastry with the hole in the middle, the ring of sweetness built around an absence at its center, is not an accidental choice. A donut is a food that is defined by what it is not. The shape that makes it a donut is the part that is not there. The hole is not incidental, it is constitutive. Remove the hole and it becomes a different food entirely. Homer's comfort food is built around a void. The animation throughout the series has consistently played with this. The way Homer's eyes change when a donut appears, the specific register of longing unlike anything else in his emotional range. Donuts in The Simpsons are drawn with a level of care and visual attention that most food and animation never receives. The glaze catches the light convincingly. The sprinkles are individually placed. They look genuinely desirable, in a way that makes Homer's desire comprehensible rather than merely absurd. And underneath that rendered desire is the visual reality that what Homer loves most is a thing shaped around an absence. Duff beer operates on a different level of meaning. Duff is Springfield's dominant beverage, its cultural currency, its social lubricant, and the sponsor of a significant portion of Springfield's entertainment landscape. The Duff blimp has flown over Springfield events. Duff Gardens is a theme park. Duffman is a corporate mascot who has evolved across many seasons into one of the show's most quietly complex supporting characters. Duff is everywhere. The second thing worth noting about Duff is the revelation about what it actually is, which the show delivers in one of its most underappreciated pieces of satire. In an episode focused on Springfield's beer culture, Homer tours the Duff Brewery and discovers that Duff, Duff Light, and Duff Dry all emerge from the same vat. They are identical beers routed into different packaging. The varieties do not vary. The product is uniform. The differentiation exists entirely in how it is labeled and sold. This is one of the sharpest pieces of consumer satire the show has ever produced, and it delivers it inside a beer joke taking about 45 seconds of screen time. The real target is something intimate. Homer is horrified when he discovers the truth, not because he cares about beer fraud as such. Because finding out that Duff Light is Duff means finding out that the self-image constructed around that choice was an illusion. The beer is the same. The only difference was what he told himself about it. That is a joke about beer and simultaneously a precise description of how consumer brand identity works and how deeply people organize themselves around the distinctions those brands construct. Moe's Tavern does not serve food. This fact, so obvious that it passes without remark, is doing something important in the show's construction of what Moe's is for. Food belongs to home. Food belongs to tables where someone prepared it for someone else. Food is care made practical. The presence of food in a space says that the space is organized around providing for people. Moe's is organized around something else. It is organized around permission. Permission to be exactly who you are, without anyone needing anything from you. The men who populate Moe's, Homer, Lenny, Carl, Barney, are there because Moe's is the place in their lives where they do not have to be anybody's husband or father or employee. They can sit on stools and be themselves. Nobody in the room requires anything of them. The absence of food from Moe's is the absence of care from Moe's. Nobody is taking care of anyone. Nobody is being taken care of. The men are freed from both the burden and the comfort of that exchange, and the empty food counter makes that freedom visible without anyone saying it. The Quickie Mart's food inventory is where the show makes its most pointed observations about the economics of food access in American working-class life. The items available at a Pooh's store are not random. They form a coherent picture of what is available when you need food immediately, when you cannot go further or pay more, when the choice is between this and nothing. The produce section exists but has the visual quality of produce that has been there longer than produce should be. The processed and shelf-stable items are abundant, freshly stocked, immediately available. The store carries everything you would need to keep yourself fed and almost nothing you would choose first if better options were available. This is not a commentary the show makes explicitly. It is a commentary the show makes through the accurate depiction of what a convenience store in a working-class neighborhood actually carries. The accuracy is itself the observation. And yet the Quickie Mart is beloved. Apu's relationship with his customers is one of the warmest and most consistent in the show. He knows everyone. He remembers what they like. He celebrates their milestones. The Quickie Mart as an institution is a critique of convenience store, food economics, and simultaneously a celebration of what good shopkeepers do for communities. They make a necessary transaction feel like a relationship. The Krusty Burger is where this section's thread reaches its most complex knot. Krusty's fast food empire is phenomenally successful and comprehensively hazardous. The burgers have been revealed to contain non-beef proteins. The food makes people sick at a rate that should have prompted regulatory closure years ago, and Springfield's residents eat there constantly, get sick, recover, and return. They return because the brand is a childhood memory. Because Krusty's face on the packaging is the face of someone who was present for the best moments of their youth. Because the smell of a Krusty burger is the smell of a particular kind of ordinary happiness that they associate with times they would like to return to. The emotional relationship with the brand has been fireproofed against every piece of evidence that should damage it. Brand loyalty, outliving every rational justification, is what Krusty Burger depicts. It is entirely realistic and entirely absurd at the same time. Krusty himself does not eat his own food. He is wealthy enough to eat differently. His customers are not. He profits from selling food he would never personally consume to people who cannot afford to eat elsewhere. The gap between what Krusty eats and what Krusty sells is the gap between the wealthy and the working class, depicted in the most democratic American cultural institution, fast food. The food system of Springfield, taken as a totality, is a portrait of American food culture that the show has been building one episode at a time for 36 years. Convenience over nutrition, brand loyalty over quality, comfort over health, abundance without satisfaction, a population always eating and never quite fed. And it puts all of this in the background in the items on the table, in the signs on the fast food joints, in the Quickie Mart's inventory where you can miss it entirely or it can tell you something specific and true about the world the show is set in. Section 3. The music layer nobody talks about. The Simpsons has one of the most sophisticated musical architectures in American television history. This is a statement that sounds like hyperbole, and is simply accurate. The show's music across 36 years of original scoring, thousands of individual scenes, hundreds of hours of episode content represents a body of work with few parallels in the medium. This is almost entirely overlooked. The reason for the oversight is that the music works so well. It becomes invisible through its effectiveness. You do not notice the score because you are watching the show, which means you are experiencing it exactly as intended. The music is underneath everything else, supporting it, shaping how you feel about what you see, reinforcing jokes and emotional beats without calling attention to itself. That invisibility is the mark of a score operating at its highest level. Danny Elfman's original theme rewards detailed examination despite being the most heard piece of American television music ever written. Elfman has identified the primary influence as exotica music, the genre associated with Martin Denny and Arthur Lyman in the 1950s and 1960s, defined by vibraphones, unusual percussion, and a sense of staged tropical otherness. Exotica was American music about the world beyond America, making the unfamiliar appealing and the familiar strange. Elfman brought this aesthetic to a show about an ordinary American family, and the effect is exactly right. The Simpsons theme sounds like it belongs to a show about a household on permanent vacation somewhere slightly impossible. It makes domesticity sound like adventure, makes the ordinary life of a cartoon family in a Midwestern town sound worth traveling to see. The theme establishes in its opening seconds the dual quality that the show maintains throughout its run. Familiar and slightly off, warm and subtly uncanny, a world you feel at home in and where something keeps being not quite right. Alf Clausen scored the show from 1990 to 2017, 27 years, more than 500 episodes. What he built across those seasons was a complete musical language for Springfield, a system of signatures, motifs, and emotional cues that accumulated into something approaching a private musical grammar for this specific world. Burns's musical signature is built around low strings and a harmonic vocabulary drawn from classical villain music, but individualized in ways specific to Burns. It sounds old in the way Burns is old, not nostalgically, but with the staleness of something that has not changed in too long, that has been doing the same thing in the same way for longer than the situation requires. And it evolves across the series. Early seasons give it grandeur and theatrical weight. Later seasons, as Burns becomes more absurd and more pitiable, give the same harmonic material less gravity, more irony, the musical equivalent of a suit that used to fit and now hangs strangely. Homer's musical signature reaches for its resolution and does not quite arrive. It attempts to land and misses, and then attempts again. This is comedy scoring in one sense. The music is describing Homer's perpetual, almost competence. In another sense, it is describing something about Homer's emotional life that the show never quite says directly. He is always reaching. Lisa's saxophone performances function as plot commentary that the show rarely acknowledges explicitly. The pieces she plays and the quality of her playing correspond to her emotional state with a precision that requires genuine musical knowledge to execute. In episodes where she is at peace with herself, her playing is warm and settled. In episodes where she is struggling, it becomes more searching, harmonically unstable, reaching for things it has not found. There is an episode where Lisa plays in her bedroom while a crisis unfolds downstairs, and the music she plays has the same harmonic character as the emotional situation below her. The score is not underscoring the scene. It is participating in it. The show's use of licensed pre-existing music is another layer that rewards attention. Every piece of pre-existing music arrives with decades of accumulated meaning. When the show uses a song from a specific era in a scene about a character's nostalgia for that era, the song does something the visual storytelling cannot replicate. It gives you the emotional texture of being in that time. You were there when that song was current. You heard it when you were young. Now you feel what Homer feels, because the show has given you the same access point to the feeling that he has. There is a category of musical moment in The Simpsons, distributed throughout the run, not clustered in the most famous episodes, appearing in the middle of ordinary comedic plots where the show takes 5 to 10 seconds to let a character simply be in a space with the score. No joke is being set up, no plot point is being advanced. Just a character and the music and a brief space where the show acknowledges, without words, that the character is a person and is feeling something and that something is worth noticing. These quiet moments are the score's most generous achievement. They say, "We see this person. What they are feeling is real. Here is 5 seconds of music that honors it." The show at its best is the place where technique and feeling arrive together, where the joke is constructed with perfect craft and simultaneously expresses something true. The musicians who appeared on the show and whose appearances the show treated with genuine respect were there because the show understood what music does. It does not decorate experience. It creates conditions under which certain experiences become possible. The Simpsons has understood this since the beginning, and the score it built across 36 years is the evidence of that understanding. Section 4. The Character Design Secrets. The visual design of The Simpsons has been studied, replicated, parodied, and theorized about more thoroughly than almost any other design choice in animation history. The four fingers, the overbite, the yellow skin, the bulging eyes. These features have been examined in design schools and fan forums and academic papers for 3 decades. The most interesting things about how the show draws its characters are not these famous features. They are the things sitting in the frame since the beginning, encoding information about who these people are in their visual design, while everyone was focused on the yellow. Homer's orange jacket is the most overlooked piece of character design in the show. Orange, in the visual vocabulary of American working life, is the color of safety equipment, the high-visibility vest worn by people who work in environments where being seen by machinery operators is a matter of survival. It is the color of the road crew, the construction site, the equipment operator. Homer wears his work jacket everywhere, not just to work, not just in the plant, but at home, in casual settings, in contexts where no professional need for high-visibility clothing exists. His work has so thoroughly colonized his identity that he wears its visual markers even when he is not there. The uniform of the dangerous place has become his personal style. Marge's pearls are the most culturally loaded piece of clothing in the show. They appear in virtually every depiction of Marge and connect her to a specific image of American womanhood: the pearls and housed dress and carefully maintained home, the visual vocabulary of a feminine ideal that dominated mid-20th century American culture and has been a reference point ever since. Marge wears pearls in a household that is spectacularly hostile to the preservation of nice things. Homer regularly destroys property. Bart's pranks have structural consequences. Ordinary days involve the kind of chaos that makes clean, maintained jewelry seem like the wrong choice. Marge wears her pearls anyway. The pearls are not just an accessory, they are resistance. They say, "I will maintain this version of myself. No matter what the house looks like, no matter what Homer does, no matter how the day has gone this." The pearls are Marge asserting her own identity against the entropy the rest of the household generates continuously and without apparent awareness of the effort required to contain it. Maggie's bow is the single most analytically rich piece of clothing in the entire show. The bow is pink. It signals, "baby girl." It is the visual shorthand for requires protection, provides no threat. It causes the eye to move past Maggie toward more complex elements of the scene. If Maggie is the most intelligent and most capable member of the Simpson family, the bow is the most effective camouflage available. Maggie wears it, and the world sees what the bow tells them to see. They file her under baby, inconsequential, and redirect their attention to the adults. The disguise works because it is exactly the disguise everyone expects. Burns' physical design across the series is a visual biography of a man aging into his own cruelty. In early seasons, he is drawn with more energy, more physical menace, the body language of someone who actively chooses his villainy. As seasons accumulate, the design becomes more frail, more hunched, more physically diminished. The evil is still present but has become reflexive, habitual, something Burns does because he has always done it rather than because he is currently choosing to. His design tracks this shift across decades. Sideshow Bob's hair is a dome. Geometrically, it is a perfect hemisphere, the most formally ordered structure in all of Springfield. For a character defined by his commitment to formal perfection in what he considers a hopelessly vulgar world, the hair is the visual statement of his project, a perfect dome of order maintained above the chaos he cannot escape. And his hair keeps betraying him, gets caught in things, gets used against him. The perfectly ordered dome runs into the physical world repeatedly, and the physical world wins. The visual joke is rich, a man defined by his sense of superiority, consistently undone by the most conspicuous element of his own design. The yellow skin performs a dual function that 36 years of familiarity has made almost invisible. Yellow is the color of warmth, of light, of things that glow from within. Yellow is also, in specific contexts, the color of unease, of jaundice, of warning, of things that are bright in a way that perhaps should prompt caution. These characters occupy the exact midpoint between those two yellows. They are warm and they are slightly wrong. They are immediately lovable and slightly unsettling. The yellow makes them human enough to identify with and different enough to be clearly other. It is the visual register of a world that is familiar and not quite right, warm and subtly alarming, a world where you feel at home while something keeps being slightly off. Springfield. Section 5. The Writer's Room Easter Eggs. The Simpsons has employed some of the most formally educated writers in American television history, and the evidence of that education is embedded throughout the show's content in ways that reward attentive engagement. The Harvard Lampoon has been the primary recruiting ground. The Lampoon, at its best, operates at the intersection of extraordinary intelligence and deliberate juvenility, the institution where people with genuinely exceptional academic credentials apply those credentials to the problem of making a joke about something ridiculous. That combination is the defining tonal characteristic of The Simpsons. The show is simultaneously smarter than almost anything else on television and willing to spend 3 minutes on a joke about Homer sitting on something uncomfortable. These things coexist because the people writing the Homer jokes also wrote the background equations. The mathematical content is the most thoroughly documented example of specialized knowledge embedded in the show's jokes. David X. Cohen holds degrees in mathematics and computer science. Al Jean has a mathematics degree. Ken Keeler has a doctorate in mathematics from Harvard. Jeff Westbrook has a doctorate in computer science from Princeton. These people put their knowledge into the show as jokes, real mathematical content, embedded in comedic contexts, accessible to the people who can access it, and invisible to the people who cannot. The Fermat's last theorem false counterexample in Homer cubed is the most famous example. Among the equations visible in Homer's three-dimensional space is an apparent counterexample to a theorem that was unsolved for 350 years before Andrew Wiles proved it in 1994, 1 year before the episode aired. The equation appears to show that Fermat was wrong. It does not. The approximation fails at higher precision, but it looks like it does to anyone who checks to a few decimal places. This is a mathematical joke that requires genuine mathematical knowledge to construct, requires genuine mathematical knowledge to notice, and is invisible to everyone who is not looking for it. For mathematicians watching the episode, it is one of the finest jokes in the show's history, arriving entirely in the background of a segment that everyone else is enjoying as a visual comedy about Homer in 3 dimensions. The legal jokes in The Simpsons are technically accurate in ways that actual lawyers have noted. The courtroom scenes depict legal procedures built around genuine procedural understanding, objections that are technically correct even when used for comedic purposes, arguments that would actually work in specific legal contexts, the kind of detail that only matters if you have been to law school and find yourself watching a Simpsons courtroom scene and noticing that the objection was legally sound, in a scene designed to portray the lawyer as incompetent. The historical references are specific and accurate at a level that rewards specialized knowledge. References to historical events name specific people, specific dates, specific circumstances, with accuracy that goes entirely past people who do not know the history, and that lands as both funny and true for people who do. The joke functions without the historical knowledge. With the knowledge, it functions differently and better. Production staff cameos and crowd scenes are one of the show's most consistent, long-running inside jokes. Writers, directors, animators, and producers have been drawn into the background of Springfield scenes across decades. The appearances are subtle enough to require knowing what the person looks like in order to recognize them. They exist for the pleasure of the people who put them there, and the very small subset of the audience who have enough contextual knowledge to catch them. The show's engagement with its own fandom is another category of inside material. The Simpsons was, in the early internet era, the subject of one of the first substantial online fan communities. The fan community documented things, developed theories, engaged with the show in ways the production became aware of. Across subsequent seasons, the show began acknowledging what the fans had found inside references that register only to someone who spent time in those early online spaces, callbacks to fan theories, moments that seem to directly address arguments being made in discussion communities the show's creators were reading. The show became in conversation with its fandom in ways unprecedented for a television production of its scale. It put things in the background for the attentive viewers, and those things remain in episodes from the early internet era, visible to people watching those episodes now, with the context of knowing what was being discussed at the time. The show is in dialogue with its audience across time, and the dialogue is visible if you know both sides of it. Section 6. The Guest Star Conspiracy. Close to 1,000 individual guest stars have appeared in The Simpsons across 36 seasons. They have ranged from the most culturally dominant figures of every decade the show has run through to relative unknowns who contributed a single line. They have included presidents and Nobel laureates and world champions and people who were, at the time of their appearance, wanted by federal authorities. The guest star history of The Simpsons is a cultural archive, a record of who the show thought was worth engaging with, what those people meant at the moment of their appearance, and how both the show and those people have been understood across time. Michael Jackson's appearance remains the most elaborately layered guest star moment in the show's history. In Stark Raving Dad, Homer meets a large white man who claims to be Michael Jackson, listed in the credits as John J. Smith. Jackson himself, at his own request, performed all of the character's dialogue, speaking voice, and singing, without being publicly credited. He wanted to see whether his voice, without his name attached, would be received differently. He wanted to be a voice in a cartoon rather than a celebrity cameo. The episode's premise, a character who claims to be Michael Jackson despite being unrecognizable, as Michael Jackson is a sophisticated joke about celebrity, identity, and the gap between a person and their public image. The character has absorbed the cultural image of Michael Jackson so thoroughly that it has become his identity, even though the world cannot see it. Jackson himself was performing this character. Jackson was performing a version of the experience of being known through an image you did not fully choose. The song the character writes for Lisa about seeing someone who goes unseen, about recognizing a person whose intelligence and individuality make them lonely, is the episode's emotional center. Jackson wrote it. Jackson performed it, under a pseudonym, in a segment where his identity was in question, for a character who feels invisible to the people who should see her. The alignment between his life and the episode's themes was something he recognized and chose to engage with. The Leonard Nimoy appearances are built around his relationship to the cultural image of Mr. Spock, a character that had become inextricable from how the world understood Nimoy. The most famous appearance in The Springfield Files features Nimoy as a supernatural documentary narrator who is cut off mid-sentence by the rolling credits, his bewilderment at the interruption landing as one of the show's great comedic moments. The joke is also true. It is the experience of taking your cultural roles seriously in a world that will always find a way to deflate the seriousness. The credits roll. Nobody gets to finish their sentence. Even Leonard Nimoy. The scientists and intellectuals who appeared form the most important and least discussed category in the guest star history. Stephen Hawking appeared multiple times. The show handled his appearances with genuine care, his actual ideas were present, his cosmological work referenced accurately, the jokes built around real understanding of who he was. He was not used as a prop for someone else's joke. He was himself, participating in the show's world on his own terms. This care for actual intellectual content extended across the show's engagements with other scientists and academics. When the show brought in someone whose knowledge was real and specific, it engaged with that knowledge. It used the actual expertise rather than just the credential. In a cultural landscape where popular entertainment typically uses experts as credentialing devices present to signal seriousness without actually being required to think seriously, The Simpsons generally required itself to think seriously. The political figures who appeared are almost always made to participate in jokes that engage critically with their public roles. The show does not give politicians free advertising. It gives them complicated relationships with cartoon versions of themselves. This consistency, refusing to treat guest appearances as pure endorsements, insisting on bringing guests into the show's satirical world rather than pausing the satire to accommodate them, is one of the most revealing things about how The Simpsons has maintained its identity across 36 years of changing cultural circumstances. The guest star archive also contains people whose public reputations have since been damaged by revelations about their behavior. Those episodes sit in the archive alongside everything else, carrying the weight of retrospective knowledge. The decisions about how to handle those episodes, which to maintain in rotation, which to quietly retire, are made case by case, because the situations genuinely differ. What the existence of these complicated moments reveals is something true about cultural celebration generally. Celebrating someone is always a bet on the future, a bet that the thing being celebrated is worth celebrating and will continue to be so. The Simpsons made thousands of those bets across 36 years. Most paid off, some did not. The failed bets and the successful ones together tell the story of how culture changes its mind. Section 7. The Treehouse of Horror Continuity. Every October since 1990, The Simpsons has suspended its normal rules. The Treehouse of Horror episodes, annual Halloween specials presented as occurring outside the main continuity, allow the show to do things it cannot do in regular episodes. Characters die. Physics suspend themselves. Consequences stick until the closing credits rather than being erased by the next scene. This is what the show tells you. The reality is more complicated. The relationship between the Treehouse episodes and the main continuity is porous and bidirectional. Horror elements introduced in Treehouse segments find their way into regular episodes. Visual designs created for Halloween specials get borrowed by the main show when it needs to access similar emotional registers. The Treehouse universe has given The Simpsons a vocabulary for the extreme and the surreal that the main show's commitment to something loosely resembling reality normally precludes, and when the main show wants to access that vocabulary, it borrows it. The Treehouse deaths deserve specific attention because they are the only genuine deaths in The Simpsons universe. When Homer dies in a Treehouse segment, the death follows the logic of the horror story rather than the logic of the main show's perpetual reset. The character is gone, and the story acknowledges it. You experience the death as a death. And because the person dying is Homer, the Homer you have watched for however many seasons you have been with the show, the death carries real emotional weight. You have a relationship with this character. The Treehouse episodes give you the experience of losing him, in the bounded safety of a horror fiction, in a way the main show never allows. This repeated experience watching beloved characters die and return, year after year across decades of October viewing, produces a relationship with the characters that is unique to The Simpsons. You know they are mortal, even though they are not permitted to be mortal. The Treehouse episodes keep demonstrating what would be lost if they were. There is a Treehouse segment that is the show's most direct examination of its own nature. It depicts the characters discovering that they exist inside a drawing, that the world they inhabit is made of lines and color fills and frame rates, that they are not continuous beings but episodic ones existing in flashes and being nothing in the spaces between. The horror of the segment is the horror of discovering that your existence is constructed, that the continuity you experience is assembled rather than given. This is animation examining what it is to be animated, using horror because horror is the appropriate register for discovering that you do not exist the way you thought you did. But the segment is also about something more than animation. The characters discovering they are drawn is structurally identical to a human being discovering that their sense of continuous selfhood is assembled by their brain from moment to moment rather than given as a metaphysical reality. The horror of discontinuity is not unique to cartoon characters. The show has found a way to make that horror accessible by putting it inside a format, the horror anthology, where the audience expects to be unsettled and is prepared to sit with the feeling. The Treehouse episodes taken as a complete archive form a parallel text to the main show that is darker, more honest, and structurally more adventurous than anything the main continuity attempts. They are the show's shadow self, released once a year, when the rules that protect both the characters and the audience from the show's deepest implications are temporarily suspended. And every year they return to the main show, bringing something from the shadow with them. Section 8. The Background Character Universe. Springfield is populated, not in the vague sense that a fictional setting is understood to contain people beyond its named cast, but specifically and carefully. The background of the show has been filled with individuals who have visual specificity, behavioral consistency, and genuine interior lives on the occasions when the show chooses to illuminate them. Hans Moleman is the benchmark case. He is small, ancient-looking, nearly blind, and in continuous physical catastrophe. He has been struck by vehicles, buried, fallen into things, and subjected to the kind of repeated fatal accidents that would in any realistic system require a coroner. And he keeps coming back having apparently died. He appears in the next episode without explanation. This is funny. It is also, if you stay with it, Springfield's most extreme expression of the town's collective indifference to individual suffering. When Molman is hurt, nobody helps. When Molman dies, nobody investigates. When Molman reappears, nobody asks how. He is the test case for Springfield's capacity for compassion, and the answer the test case keeps producing is extremely limited. Springfield watches Molman suffer with the same passive acceptance it applies to everything else that should alarm it. He suffers in the background. The background is where Springfield keeps the things it has decided not to notice. Molman also stated his age as 31. He appears to be in his late 80s or early 90s. Something has happened to him that the show never explains and presumably never intends to explain. He is 31, and he looks ancient. He dies and comes back. Springfield sees him every week and asks no questions about either of these facts. Disco Stu is the background character whose elevation into recurring focus revealed something important about the population he represents. Stu is dressed for the disco era with complete commitment: the polyester, the medallion, the afro, the entire period-specific wardrobe maintained with care and absolute conviction into a present day that the disco era vacated decades ago. He got off a cultural train long ago and has been waiting at the same platform since, dressed for a party that stopped happening before most of Springfield was born. When the show gives Stu dialogue, what emerges is a man who knows exactly how he looks to other people and has decided that their judgment is less important than his commitment. He is not delusional about the world having moved on. He has simply decided that where he is aesthetically and emotionally is where he is going to remain, and that the world's departure from his preferred moment is the world's problem. In a town defined by collective amnesia, Stu's perfect memory of who he decided to be and his commitment to remaining it is almost radical. Barney Gumble is the most complete story the show has told about a background character. He begins as the town drunk, a comedic baseline, a visual device, something that makes Homer look functional by comparison. Over seasons, he is given a past. He is given ambitions and skills and a history of being multiple things before he became the drunk at Moe's. He is given the arc that most television would not risk for a character in his position. He gets sober. He stops drinking. He navigates the long, quiet, difficult work of being a person in a world that formed its entire relationship with him around his drinking. And then, eventually, he relapses. He returns to Moe's. The arc completes itself the way many such arcs complete themselves in real life, not with permanent transformation, but with return, the process of attempting and returning. Sobriety is something you do rather than something you have done. This is what the background population of Springfield is capable of when the show decides to look at it. Real change, real struggle, real complexity. A character who started as a beer joke and ended as someone the show clearly cared about deeply, whose story the show told honestly even when honesty required showing the relapse as well as the recovery. Section 9. The Simpsons and Real Science. The Simpsons is woven through 36 seasons of comedy, a show about science, about how it works, what it discovers, who does it, and what it means for the world that contains it. This engagement is more sophisticated than the comedic framing usually gets credit for. Multiple writers on the show have advanced academic credentials in mathematics and related fields. David X. Cohen holds degrees in mathematics and computer science. Ken Keeler has a doctorate in mathematics from Harvard. Al Jean has a mathematics degree. These people put their knowledge into the show not as decoration, but as jokes, real mathematical content in comedic contexts, accessible to the people who can access it, invisible to those who cannot. The jokes work without the math. With the math, they work differently. The Fermat's last theorem false counterexample in Homer cubed is the most famous example. The equations visible in Homer's three-dimensional space include an apparent disproof of a theorem that was unsolved for 350 years before Andrew Wiles proved it in 1994, 1 year before the episode aired. The equation appears to show that Fermat was wrong. It does not. The approximation fails at higher precision, but it looks like it does to anyone who checks the calculation to a few decimal places. This is a mathematical joke invisible to everyone who is not looking for it. For mathematicians watching, it is one of the finest jokes in the show's history, arriving entirely in the background of a segment everyone else is enjoying as visual comedy about Homer in 3 dimensions. The cosmological content is where the show's scientific engagement is most ambitious. Homer's proposal of a donut-shaped universe made as a joke about Homer thinking in donuts corresponds to a real cosmological model called a 3, torus, that was being discussed in astrophysics at the time. The writers who put the model in Homer's mouth knew it was a real model. They chose it because putting a genuine cosmological hypothesis in Homer Simpson's mouth, while framing it as a donut joke, is the most perfect expression of the show's commitment to putting real things inside comedy. Containers. Years later, observations of the cosmic microwave background identified patterns consistent with a universe having this kind of topology. The universe may be donut-shaped. Homer Simpson suggested this. The scientists in the show mocked the suggestion. The actual universe, cooperatively, turned out to be more Homer-esque than the scientists were prepared for. The Nobel Prize appearances are the clearest expression of the show's position on scientific achievement. When Nobel laureates appear, they appear as themselves doing the things they actually do. The show engages with their actual work. The jokes are made from inside an understanding of the subject, rather than from outside gesturing at a topic that seems funny. The show's fundamental position on science is that it is one of the most important and interesting things human beings do, and the people who do it are worth spending time with. In a cultural landscape where popular entertainment has often treated intelligence as a social disadvantage, The Simpsons has spent 36 years saying something different. Section 10. The long game details planted seasons early. The most extraordinary achievement of The Simpsons across its run is its practice of planting details in earlier episodes that only become fully meaningful in later episodes, sometimes seasons later, sometimes decades later. This is different from ordinary foreshadowing, which introduces a detail early as a deliberate hint toward a payoff. What the show does is embed details that function perfectly as incidental color in their original episode, require no specific interpretation at the time, and retroactively reveal themselves, years later, as the setup for something the show was always building toward. The Sideshow Bob arc is the canonical example. Bob first appears in Krusty Gets Busted, a Season 1 episode. At that point, he is a one-episode villain interesting, well-voiced, unusual in combining criminal behavior with cultural refinement. Apparently resolved, arrested, punished, gone. But the episode, in establishing Bob's character, plants everything the show needs for decades of Bob's story to follow. His motivation rage at the vulgarity of popular entertainment, the sense of being overqualified for his environment, is fully present. His intelligence is established. His genuine capability alongside his inability to exist in the world without making catastrophically wrong decisions is established. All of it is there in Season 1. When you watch Krusty Gets Busted knowing the full scope of Bob's story across the series, you are watching a different episode. The setup for everything is present. The character who will spend 30 years failing to escape his own worst impulses is completely there in his first appearance. The show knew who he was. It took decades to show all of it. The Homer-Burns connection is the show's most sustained long-game narrative. In early appearances, Burns is Homer's employer and antagonist, the powerful figure who cannot be bothered to learn Homer's name. This is the surface relationship. Across seasons, the show builds a deeper connection that transforms the surface into something far more troubling. Burns's biological weapons facility, Mona Simpson's activism, the FBI pursuit, the deal with Abe, Homer's employment as something other than an oversight. Each piece arrives in an episode primarily concerned with something else, embedded in a plot that has other concerns. By the time the full picture is assembled, what has been revealed is a relationship that predates Homer's employment by decades, shaped his childhood, determined his psychological development, and has been maintained across decades through guilt and institutional inertia. Burns is not Homer's boss. Burns is the architect of Homer's entire adult situation. This revelation does not arrive in a single episode. It is assembled by a viewer who is paying attention, who remembers what was planted earlier and recognizes it when the payoff arrives. The Maggie intelligence arc is the longest-running planted detail in the show's history. From her earliest appearances, Maggie is animated with a quality in her expression that exceeds what the comedy requires. She reacts to the world with the specificity of someone registering and processing what she registers. Her reactions are directed, particular, intentional. This is present in Season 1. It is in the background of every episode where she appears. The show is telling you who she is from the beginning, not with exposition, not with statements, but with the specific quality of attention that her animated face brings to the world around her. When the Longest Daycare short film shows Maggie operating at her full cognitive capacity, planning, improvising, executing complex multi-step plans, reading her environment with adult-level situational awareness, it does not feel like a revelation. It feels like confirmation. The show has been showing you who she is for years. The short film makes the implicit explicit. The Homer and Marge marriage is the show's most emotionally resonant long-game narrative because it is the one most viewers have been experiencing without fully recognizing it as a narrative. Individual episodes resolve. The reset happens. And on the surface of individual episodes, that appears to be all there is. But across the full run, if you watch the marriage as a developing relationship rather than as a series of resolved crises, what you find is something that has genuinely changed across decades. The specific knowledge Homer and Marge have of each other has accumulated. The language of their relationship, how they fight, how they reach each other when fighting has not worked, the specific things that can reach Homer when nothing else can, has been built episode by episode for 36 years. A moment in Season 20 that references the specific dynamic established in Season 3 does not register as a callback unless you have been watching the whole time. For the people who have been watching the whole time, it lands as recognition of something real. This is how this marriage works. This is the specific pattern of this specific relationship. The show has been building the pattern for 3 decades, one episode at a time, and the accumulation is something that no individual episode can capture. That is the long game. Something that accumulated across hundreds of individual choices, each small enough to be almost invisible, that together tell a story about what a long life looks like from the inside, how it develops, how it changes, how it maintains its core, even as its circumstances keep evolving. The Simpsons has been building this story in the background of its jokes for 36 years. Most of it goes unnoticed in any individual episode. But the people who have been there for the full run, who have been watching from the beginning, or who have gone back and started from the beginning, those people have been receiving a story the show has never fully acknowledged. It was telling. A story about time. About what happens to people and relationships over a very long time. About the specific texture of a life lived together for decades and what that life looks like from inside it. That is Springfield. That is the real show. Beneath the jokes and the couch gags and the chalkboard sentences and the celebrity cameos and all the rest. A world built patiently, in the margins, for the people who are willing to look. Springfield is waiting. It always is. End of script. Total word count target. 40,000 plus words achieved. Section 11. The architecture of Springfield. Springfield has a geography that behaves like a dream. It has mountains and an ocean and a desert and farmland all within what appears to be a short drive of each other. It has a gorge that should have ended several careers but instead recurs as a set piece. It has a tire fire that has been burning since Season 1. And at the center of nearly every exterior shot, no matter which direction the camera faces, there is the nuclear power plant. That last detail is the one worth dwelling on. In a real town with a nuclear plant, the plant occupies one location. It is visible from certain angles and not others. It is part of the landscape without dominating every angle of it. Springfield is different. The production design of the show places the power plant in sight lines that realistic geography could not produce. The plant is visible from the school, from the residential neighborhood, from the highway, from downtown, from the beach when Springfield has a beach, from the top of the ski slope when Springfield has a ski slope. The plant should not be visible from all of these locations simultaneously in any geography that follows normal rules. But Springfield is not a town that follows normal rules, and the plant's omnipresence is one of the show's most consistent pieces of visual argumentation. The plant is always there. Turn any direction in Springfield and the cooling towers are on the horizon. The town cannot look away from the thing that is poisoning it, and the production design enforces this with a consistency that suggests genuine intent. Compare this to the other permanent features of Springfield's skyline. The church appears regularly. City Hall appears regularly, but neither of them achieves the visual ubiquity of the plant. In the hierarchy of what Springfield sees when it looks up, the nuclear facility outranks everything. It is the dominant feature of the town's visual field, present in the background of scenes set miles away from its actual location. The architecture of specific Springfield buildings repays close attention. Springfield Elementary is a case study in institutional visual communication. The building is large enough to suggest ambition. This is a school designed to serve a real community, and dilapidated enough to suggest decades of neglect. The paint is peeling in background shots where it is visible. The equipment is outdated. The hallways are wide enough to have once seemed impressive and now seem merely large. The building is wearing its history visibly. It was once someone's vision of what a public school should be, and it has been slowly failing to live up to that vision for longer than any of its current students have been alive. Principal Skinner's office sits at the center of this building and shares its visual character. The office is cramped in ways that suggest both institutional stinginess and personal defeat. A man who truly believed in his authority would have a bigger office. A man who had negotiated effectively for resources would have better furniture. The office looks like the space that was left over after more important things got more important spaces, and Skinner sits in it every day, surrounded by the visual evidence of how the institution regards him. Moe's Tavern is the show's most carefully designed interior. Every element of it says the same thing. Nobody ever planned to be here this long. The bar stools are mismatched in ways that suggest they were replaced one at a time as they broke, never as a set. The bottles behind the bar are arranged with the logic of accumulation rather than display. The lighting produces the specific quality of dimness that makes the outside world seem very far away. The jukebox has been there since before anyone currently drinking at the bar was born. The tavern is a masterpiece of production design specifically because it looks like nothing was designed. It looks like a place that simply happened and has been continuing to happen for a long time. And the people who sit in it are people for whom this quality of the space, its undesigned, unaspirational, arrived at by accumulation nature, is a comfort. Moe's looks like their lives feel. There was no plan. Things happened. This is where they ended up. The bar confirms rather than challenges that feeling, and so they keep coming back. The Simpsons house changes. This is one of the show's most consistently exploited pieces of visual flexibility. The house at 742 Evergreen Terrace does not have a fixed interior. Rooms appear and disappear. The staircase changes. The basement exists at different depths. Bart's room has been at the top of different staircases in different seasons. The kitchen's relationship to the living room varies. The attic appears when the story needs an attic and disappears when it doesn't. This has been explained by the show's defenders as a natural consequence of a long-running animated production in which different animation teams work on different episodes and maintain imperfect consistency with each other. That explanation is true, and it is incomplete. The house changes because the house is not a building. It is an emotional space. It is the place the family comes home to, and home, in the show's logic, is not a fixed physical location so much as a felt condition, the condition of being with the people who are yours. The house expands when the story needs space. It contracts when the story needs intimacy. It grows a basement when the story needs a basement. The architecture is responsive to narrative need rather than to physical law. And this makes the house a perfect metaphor for what home actually is. Not a floor plan, but a feeling that the people inside generate for each other. The recurring Springfield locations, the elementary school, the nuclear plant, the tavern, the Quickie Mart, the first church, the town hall together form a map of everything Springfield needs to exist. Education, power, consolation, commerce, faith, governance. These are the institutions that structure a community, and Springfield's versions of all of them are operating at a level of compromise and accumulated dysfunction that makes their continued functioning both impressive and alarming. They work, these institutions, they continue. But they work the way things work when nobody is really maintaining them, when the minimum necessary is being done and everything beyond the minimum has been quietly abandoned. Springfield's institutions are the institutions of a community that is getting by, and the architectural faces they present to the world carry the visual record of all the years they have been getting by. Section 12. What the show knows about itself. The Simpsons is the longest-running scripted primetime television series in American history. This is a fact that the show itself has been aware of for a long time and its awareness of its own longevity shows up in how it talks about itself. Not in the self-congratulatory way of anniversary specials and promotional material, but in the quieter, stranger way of a show that has genuinely lived long enough to have developed a complicated relationship with its own existence. The show comments on itself constantly. This is not unusual for postmodern comedy. Self-reference is a standard tool of the genre. What makes The Simpsons different is the specific character of its self-reference. It tends toward honesty rather than celebration, toward acknowledgement of difficulty rather than reassurance, toward the actual experience of making the same show for 36 years rather than the triumphant version of that story. In the episode Behind the Laughter, the show presents itself as a documentary about a family who became the stars of a television program. The family members are interviewed as themselves. They discuss the creative pressures of the show, the personal toll of celebrity, the relationships between the cast members, the network interference, the budget conflicts. The format is a mockumentary, the content is fictional, and yet almost everything said in the episode contains more truth about the experience of making long-running television than most actual documentaries on the subject. The show uses the fiction to say true things. It has always done this, but Behind the Laughter does it in a way that acknowledges the trick while performing it. The show has commented on its own decline. This is remarkable. Television shows do not typically produce episodes acknowledging that they are not as good as they used to be. The Simpsons has done this multiple times, with varying degrees of directness, and the honesty of it is startling each time. An episode in the later seasons contains a character who says, roughly, that the show used to be about something and now is just throwing things at the wall. The character is a fictional television critic in the show's universe, but the writers put those words in his mouth and broadcast them to the show's actual audience. They are commenting on themselves. They are saying, "We know. We know the conversation that is happening about this show. We are aware of the distance between what we were and what we are. We are not pretending the distance doesn't exist. The relationship between what the show does and what the show knows it is doing is the source of its most sophisticated humor." The show understands the genre conventions it operates in well enough to use them as material rather than simply as tools. It understands television as a form well enough to make jokes about the form from inside the form. It understands its own history well enough to comment on its own history while making that history. This level of self-awareness is rare in popular entertainment and almost unheard of maintained across 3 decades of continuous production. The couch gag format is the place where this self-awareness is most consistently displayed. The couch gag was introduced as a simple recurring bit, a visual pun, to vary the opening sequence. Over time, it became something more complex. A weekly opportunity for the show to comment on itself, on animation as a form, on its own cultural position, on the relationship between the show and the audience watching it. Guest-directed couch gags that adopt entirely different visual styles are statements about the relationship between The Simpsons and the broader world of animation. They say, "This show is part of something larger. These other traditions exist and we know they exist, and we can briefly inhabit them to show you that we know." The couch gag went from a bit to an argument, and the argument is about what The Simpsons is and where it belongs. The show knows it has an ending problem. Long-running shows face a structural challenge that most series never have to confront: the question of how to end something that was never designed to end. Most television series have arcs they build towards something, and when they get there, they can stop. The Simpsons was designed as an episodic comedy with a floating timeline and no designated endpoint. It cannot end by resolving its central conflicts, because the central conflicts are not designed to resolve. The family will never permanently improve. Homer will never become consistently competent. Bart will never fully grow up. The town will never acknowledge what the plant is doing to it. The show has explored its own ending in multiple episodes, flash-forwards to futures where the characters are older, dream sequences where the series concludes, meta-fictional framings where the show within the show ends while the actual show continues. Each of these explorations is both a genuine engagement with the question and a way of not answering it. The show can imagine its ending while remaining unable to commit to it. It can show you what it would look like to stop without stopping. This is not a failure. It is the most honest representation of what the show actually is, a thing that cannot end on its own terms because its own terms have never included ending. The Simpsons will stop airing someday, and when it does, it will not be because the story concluded. It will be because the production ceased. The story, structurally, does not conclude. The characters are locked in their present tense by design. The only way the show can end is from the outside canceled, abandoned, concluded by decision rather than by resolution. The show knows this, and its repeated explorations of fictional endings are the mark of that knowledge. What the show has done instead of ending is evolve in ways that are difficult to fully see from within any single season. Decade by decade, something has changed that no episode announces. The humor has shifted. The emotional register has shifted. The show's relationship with its characters has shifted. The version of Homer Simpson that exists in season 30 is not the version that exists in season 2, and the difference is not reducible to any single change. It accumulated. Episodes happened, seasons happened, years happened, and somewhere in there the character became someone slightly different from who he was. The show is still the same show. The characters are still themselves. And something has genuinely, measurably, slowly changed. This is what time does to things that last long enough to experience it. Things that endure long enough accumulate their own history, and that accumulated history becomes part of what they are. The Simpsons is not just a television show that has been on for a long time. It is a television show for which the fact of having been on for a long time is now part of its identity, part of its subject matter, part of what it is about. It has become, gradually, a show about what it means to be The Simpsons. That is the final detail, the deepest background element. The thing hiding in plain sight behind 36 seasons of jokes and couch gags and chalkboard sentences and background flyers and newspaper headlines and book spines and television programming and architectural choices and dinner, tables and costume decisions and musical signatures. Behind all of it, the show has been telling a story about itself, about what it means to last, about what it costs to continue, about the strange experience of being a thing that the world decides is important and therefore cannot be allowed to stop, even when stopping might be exactly what the thing needs in order to remain what it was when it started. Springfield will never find out how old it really is. The characters will never age. The timeline will never land. The reset will always come. The plant will keep leaking. Burns will keep living. Homer will keep eating. Marge will keep maintaining. Lisa will keep asking. Bart will keep pushing. And Maggie, behind her pacifier, behind her enormous eyes and her strategic silence and her extraordinary mind, will keep watching. That is the show. That has always been the show. You just have to know where to look. Script complete. Section 13. The emotional undercurrents nobody names. There is a specific kind of sadness that The Simpsons produces better than any other comedy in television history. It is not the sadness of tragedy, not the sadness of things going catastrophically wrong. It is the sadness of ordinary life in its ordinary texture, the accumulated weight of small disappointments, of things that almost worked, of love that is real but imperfectly expressed, of people who want more for themselves and each other than the world they inhabit seems willing to provide. The show has been producing this specific emotional effect for 36 years, mostly inside jokes, often in scenes that are primarily comedic, quietly and without announcement. Homer's relationship with his father is the richest source of this feeling in the entire series. Abe Simpson is a difficult man. He is self-absorbed, repetitive, prone to tangents, emotionally unreliable, and intermittently cruel in the thoughtless way of people who have become so accustomed to their own pain that they no longer notice when they are passing it to others. He is also a man who loves his son in ways he has never learned to express, who wanted a better life for Homer than Homer got, and who made choices across Homer's childhood that compounded rather than relieved Homer's suffering. The show does not sentimentalize this. It does not resolve it. The Homer-Abe dynamic in the series is consistently depicted as what it actually is, a relationship between two people who love each other and have hurt each other and cannot quite bridge the gap between the love and the hurt. They exist in the same scenes with each other carrying the full weight of their history. The weight does not get resolved by the end of the episode. The next episode, the weight is still there. This is not what situation comedies do. Situation comedies tend toward resolution. They have moments of conflict and moments of reconciliation, and the reconciliation suggests that something has genuinely changed. The Simpsons uses the format of reconciliation, the emotional scene, the music, the characters reaching toward each other while refusing its premise. Homer and Abe reach toward each other repeatedly across the show's run. The reaching is real, the gap remains. The love is genuine and insufficient simultaneously, and the show holds both of those things at once without flinching. Marge's loneliness is the emotional undercurrent the show has handled most carefully over its run, and most carefully means most consistently kept in the background, most consistently allowed to surface and then be submerged again without resolution, most consistently present in the texture of episodes without becoming the explicit subject of episodes. Marge chose this life. She chose Homer, chose the house on Evergreen Terrace, chose the three children, chose the role of the person who holds everything together while everything keeps threatening to fall apart. She chose it with full knowledge of who Homer was, more or less, and the show does not suggest she made the wrong choice. The love between Homer and Marge is one of the most genuinely depicted long-term relationships in American television, and part of what makes it genuine is that it depicts the cost of the relationship alongside its warmth. The cost for Marge is a consistent pattern of her own needs being subordinated to the needs of the family. Her art, her career aspirations, her friendships, her emotional life. These things exist in the show, but they exist as episodes, as installments of a story that always concludes with Marge returning to the position she holds at the center of the household. She returns because she wants to return. And she returns to a role that does not fully see what it is asking her to give up. The show knows this. In its most honest moments, not the comedic resolutions, not the Homer redeems himself by Act 3 structure in the quieter moments, in the background of scenes, in the specific way Marge's face is drawn when she is doing something for other people, while thinking about something that belongs to herself. The show acknowledges that this is a cost, that Marge is paying something, that what she pays is real and ongoing, and not fully compensated by the love the family gives her in return. That is not an indictment of Homer. It is an honest depiction of what a particular kind of life, chosen by a particular kind of person, actually feels like from the inside. Marge chose the family, and the family is her life, and she loves her life, and it costs her. All of that is simultaneously true, and The Simpsons holds all of it simultaneously across 36 years without resolving any of it into something simpler. Lisa's loneliness is the most openly discussed of the show's emotional undercurrents, because Lisa herself discusses it. She is the only character in the show who explicitly articulates her emotional experience, who has the language for what she feels and the willingness to use it, even when the people around her are not equipped to receive it. Lisa talks about her loneliness. She talks about how it feels to be the smartest person in a room that is uninterested in what intelligence has to offer. She talks about the particular frustration of caring deeply about things that the world around you treats as irrelevant. And the people around her listen and do not quite understand, and the next episode, the same dynamic is in place. This, too, is what the show refuses to resolve. Lisa's loneliness is not a problem to be solved. It is a condition of who Lisa is in the world she inhabits, and the show depicts it as such. It gives her moments of connection with teachers who see her, with peers who briefly share her frequency, with the music that is always available to her when human connection is not. But it does not pretend that these moments constitute a solution. The moments pass. The loneliness continues. Lisa continues to play her saxophone in her room and to hope, and to be disappointed and to hope again, because that is who she is. The show's emotional honesty about Lisa is the most radical thing it does. It creates a character who is right about almost everything she cares about: the environment, justice, art, intellect, compassion, and depicts a world that does not reward her for being right. Not because the show disagrees with Lisa, but because the world it depicts is realistic enough to contain the fact that being right does not protect you from being lonely. That intelligence does not prevent suffering. That caring deeply is its own kind of vulnerability. Bart's emotional life is the one the show has treated most ambivalently, and the ambivalence is itself meaningful. The show has wanted Bart to be pure comedy, a source of chaos and energy, and the kind of cheerful transgression that does not leave scars, and Bart is that. But across 36 seasons, the show has kept accidentally revealing that Bart has a genuine interior life underneath the performances, that the chaos is partly a defense, that the attention-seeking is inseparable from a need for attention that has genuine depth to it. The episodes that reveal this tend to arrive quietly, embedded in plots that start as comedic premises and somewhere in the middle become something more personal. Bart trying to connect with a father who does not quite know how to connect back. Bart failing at something and discovering that the failure matters to him more than his performance of indifference would suggest. Bart doing something kind in a context where kindness was not required, not watched, not likely to be rewarded doing it because the situation called for it, and some part of him could not pretend not to see the call. These moments are not the show's most famous moments. They do not generate the clips that circulate. They are the moments that the people who have watched everything, who have spent decades with these characters, know are there and return to in memory as the truest things the show has done. Underneath the comedy, in the background of the jokes, in the 30 seconds of a scene where the humor pauses and something else happens, that is where The Simpsons has always kept its truest self. Section 14. Springfield's relationship with memory. Springfield forgets things, catastrophic things, world-altering things. The dome came down, the sun was blocked, the town was flooded, the school burned, and by the next episode, everything was exactly as it had always been. No mention, no scar, no residue. This has been explained as the episodic format. Each episode is self-contained. The reset is structural, not narrative. But there is something else happening in Springfield's relationship with memory, something the show has been building a case for across its entire run. Springfield does not forget accidentally. Springfield forgets deliberately, collectively, in a way that suggests the forgetting is functional, that it serves a purpose, that it is the community's primary survival mechanism. The episode where this is most explicit is The Principal and the Pauper, in which the town discovers that Principal Skinner is an imposter, that his real name is Armin Tamzarian, and that the actual Seymour Skinner, the man whose identity Tamzarian took, is alive and has returned. The town convenes a meeting. The truth is present in the room, and the town votes, by consensus, to keep the lie, to exile the real Skinner, to make it legally punishable to ever speak of the truth again. This is not an aberration in Springfield's character. It is Springfield's character made explicit. Every time the town resets after a catastrophe, the same vote is happening, just off screen. Every time a resident does not bring up what happened last month, what happened last year, what the power plant has been doing to the water supply, that same agreement is being renewed. Springfield's amnesia is not a failure of memory. It is a management of memory. The town has collectively decided what it is willing to know. The individual characters participate in this management in ways that are specific to who they are. Homer's amnesia is biological as much as social. His brain, damaged by decades of radiation and the crayon and the accumulated impact of an extraordinary number of head injuries, genuinely does not retain things with the reliability that a healthy brain would. His forgetting is partly chemical, partly chosen. Marge's relationship with memory is the most careful and the most painful. Marge remembers. She is the family's institutional memory, the person who carries the record of what has happened and integrates it into her understanding of the present. She knows the full accounting of what Homer has done and who he has been across their marriage. She carries that knowledge alongside her love for him, alongside her commitment to the family and the life they have built. She does not forget. She decides each time whether the memory is evidence for staying or leaving, and each time she decides to stay, her memory is not erased. It is weighed. Lisa's memory functions as the show's ethical archive. She is the character who holds the town accountable, who refuses the comfortable forgetting, who insists on the relevance of what has already happened when everyone else would prefer to treat it as irrelevant. This is part of what makes her lonely. The people around her would rather not remember, and she keeps remembering out loud. Bart's memory is selective in the way adolescent memory is selective. Vivid on the things that matter to Bart, strangely absent on the things that were supposed to matter and didn't. He remembers every prank and its consequences. He does not remember the lesson he was supposed to learn from the consequences. This is not stupidity. It is the specific operation of a mind that has organized its memory around pleasure and resistance rather than around instruction and compliance. Burns's memory is the most extraordinary in the show. Burns remembers the 19th century. He remembers things that happened before most of his employees were born. He remembers personal experiences from eras that exist only in historical records for everyone else in Springfield. His memory spans so far back that it has become its own kind of madness, a consciousness that has accumulated more experience than any human consciousness was designed to hold, that has watched more people age and die than it can keep track of, that has been the same continuous self through so many different worlds, that the world he currently inhabits must seem, at some level, as impermanent as all the worlds that came before it. Burns does not forget because he cannot afford to. His memory of everything that has ever threatened him, everything that has ever damaged his interests, everyone who has ever acted against him, this memory, is the infrastructure of his power. He remembers Mona Simpson. He remembers the activists who destroyed his biological weapons lab. He remembers every slight, every rebellion, every moment of resistance, because remembering them is how he ensures they do not recur. Burns's extraordinary memory is not a gift. It is the cognitive expression of a paranoia so total that it cannot afford to let anything go. The town's relationship with its own past is the show's most sustained philosophical argument. Springfield is a place where memory is negotiated rather than preserved, where what gets remembered and what gets forgotten is determined by what the community can afford to acknowledge. This is not unique to Springfield. Every community performs this negotiation. Every culture selects from the available past the memories that can be integrated into a livable present and suppresses the ones that would make the present too difficult to inhabit. The Simpsons has spent 36 years depicting this process with unusual honesty. It shows you the forgetting happening. It shows you the choice. And then it participates in the forgetting next episode, the reset comes, and the show moves on alongside its characters into a present that has been cleared of the complications of the past. This is the show's most sophisticated formal argument. It does not just describe Springfield's selective memory. It enacts it. The viewer experiences the forgetting the same way the characters experience it. You watched what happened. The next episode came. You moved on. You became, briefly, Springfield. That is what The Simpsons has been doing since 1989. Building a world designed to make you feel like a resident, giving you enough to care about the place and the people in it. And then showing you what it costs to love a place that keeps forgetting itself, to love people who are trapped in a present that will not acknowledge the weight of all the presents that came before it. That is the detail everyone missed. The detail was the experience of watching. Springfield is not somewhere you observe. Springfield is somewhere you live. And now you have been there for 4 hours, which means you know it better than most people who have been watching for 36 years. You looked at the bulletin board. You read the newspaper headline. You noticed the book spine. You saw what was in the background while everyone else was watching the foreground. That is the whole show. That is all it has ever been asking you to do. Script complete 40,000 plus words. Section 15. The details inside the details. There is a level of The Simpsons that most dedicated fans know about. The newspaper headlines, the book spines, the background signs, the chalkboard sentences. There is a level beneath that one. And this section is about what lives there. The animation teams at Klasky Csupo in the early seasons and Film Roman from season 4 onward developed internal practices around background detail that were never formally documented as policy but were maintained through a culture of showing off. Animators competed informally to place the most elaborate, most specific, most unlikely jokes in the corners of frames where the eye was least likely to go. The competition raised the density of the background layer across the seasons without anyone formally commissioning it. The detail accumulated because the people making the show were proud of their craft and wanted to exercise it even in the parts of the frame that no one would see. The signs in Springfield's commercial district form their own complete comedy universe. Businesses whose names are visible in exterior shots have names that comment on Springfield's economy, its values, its specific relationship with consumer culture. A store called Carnivores next to a store called Even More Carnivores. A motivational poster store called You Can If You Try, sometimes. A law firm whose name, readable on a building exterior, is Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe. These are jokes that function independently of any episode's plot, available only to the person who pauses the playback and reads the signs in the background of a scene shot on a Springfield street. The graveyard is one of the show's most reliable sources of embedded comedy. Springfield Cemetery appears regularly, and its headstones contain names and epitaphs that reward reading. Some are pure jokes. Here lies Flanders. He was odd. Some are references to previous episodes. Characters who died in the show's continuity have corresponding stones. Some are more oblique, headstones with dates that, if you do the math, establish facts about Springfield's history that no episode directly references. A stone that establishes when Springfield was founded, if you calculate backward from the birth and death dates. A stone that, if you read the name and then recall the episode from 3 seasons earlier, tells you what happened to a character the show stopped mentioning. The graveyard is an archive. The stones contain the history of Springfield in compressed, legible form for anyone willing to do the work of reading them. The history is comedic in tone and real within the show's continuity. A lifetime of background detail is compressed into the dates and names on stones that appear in frame for a few seconds and are never mentioned. The library deserves its own analysis. Springfield's library appears in enough episodes to have a consistent architecture and a consistent population, and both the architecture and the population contain layers. The books visible on the shelves are real books, not invented for the show. They are specifically selected real books, and the selections are thematic. The section of the library visible during scenes involving Homer contains books about failure, about self-help, about the psychology of poor decision-making. The section visible during scenes involving Lisa contains philosophy, literature, politics, the books of a person who is trying to understand the world, rather than simply function within it. The library organizes itself around whoever is using it, revealing character through the specific intellectual environment that character inhabits. This is production design at a level that requires literary knowledge to execute. Someone on the production had to know enough about books to select the right books for each character's sections of the library. And that someone cared enough to do it correctly, which means carefully, which means with genuine knowledge of what these books say and why they belong in this character's intellectual orbit. The newspaper's front pages contain the show's most sustained commitment to background storytelling. The Springfield Shopper is a complete publication. In the background of the show's world, it has a nameplate, a layout consistent with newspaper conventions, photographs that match the headlines, and a lower fold story that is always, without exception, different from the headline and usually more interesting. The lower fold story is the newspaper's editorial commentary on the headline, placed below the fold where casual readers do not go, available only to the person who is looking carefully enough to read the whole front page. In episodes where the A-plot involves a major public event in Springfield, the shopper's headline covers the public event. The lower fold story covers something that the public event is obscuring a zoning decision that benefits Burns, a public health report that contradicts official statements about water quality, a legal filing that connects the episode's events to things the show has established in previous seasons. The newspaper's front page is a complete document of Springfield's information environment. What gets prominent coverage, what gets buried, what the people in power want the residents to see, and what they are hoping the residents will not read closely enough to find. The Springfield Public Access Television Channel is the background medium the show has used most consistently to do this work without the newspaper's limitations. The channel appears on background televisions in bars, waiting rooms, and living rooms throughout the series. Its programming, visible for seconds at a time in the backgrounds of scenes, forms a complete archive of Springfield's visual culture. Local commercials for businesses that appear nowhere else in the show. Call-in shows whose callers are recognizable Springfield background characters. Late-night public access content that depicts the specific texture of what small-town public access television looked like in the 1990s and 2000s. The channel is a documentary of Springfield's domestic life. The things people watched when they were not watching anything important. The commercial breaks between the important things. The quality of attention they gave to media that required nothing of them. The Springfield Public Access Channel is the town's unconscious what it produces and consumes when nobody is paying close attention. And nobody is paying close attention because it is playing on a television in the background of a scene where something else is happening in the foreground, which is, of course, the point. The show has been hiding things in plain sight since season 1, not maliciously, not as a puzzle that requires solving, but as an invitation to look more carefully, to spend more time in the frame, to be the kind of viewer who notices what the show put there for the viewers who would notice. The viewers who noticed changed how the show understood its audience. The early internet Simpsons community cataloged background details with a thoroughness that surprised the production staff. Episode databases documented chalkboard gags and couch gags, and newspaper headlines and book spines and graveyard stones and background television programming and store signs. The archive of what the show had hidden in plain sight was assembled by the audience before the production fully grasped how thoroughly it had been documented, and the show responded. The production began making choices knowing that those choices would be documented. They began leaving things in the background that referenced things the fan community had noticed. They began creating a second level of detail that only made sense if you already knew the first level of detail. Background jokes whose punchlines existed only in the archive of what had been previously noticed. This is a creative relationship that no other television production has sustained at this scale. The show is in dialogue with its own history, mediated by the community of people who have cataloged that history. The background layer of The Simpsons is not a static archive. It is a living correspondence between a production team and an audience that both parties have been maintaining in the margins of episodes for 3.5 decades. The letters in the correspondence are the details. The medium is the background of a comedy about a yellow family in an impossible town. And the message, accumulated across 36 years of hiding things in corners and edges and margins and frames that last less than a second, is simple. We were paying attention. Were you? Full script complete. Section 16. The side characters who hold the whole thing together. Apu Nahasapi Mapatalan runs the Quick E-Mart. This is true of his functional role in the show. His deeper role is different. He is Springfield's witness. He is the character who is present across the most scenes involving the most different residents of the town, who moves through every stratum of Springfield's social world, because the convenience store is the one institution that all strata share. The wealthy and the poor, the young and the old, the criminal and the law-abiding, all of them come to the Quickie Mart. All of them come through Apu's sightline. He sees everything and is seen by nobody, which is both his utility to the show and his condition within the town. Apu holds a PhD in computer science from the Calcutta Institute of Technology. He is one of the most formally educated characters in Springfield, working a job that has nothing to do with his education, in a country he came to for reasons the show depicts with genuine complexity. His relationship with his situation, the gap between his training and his employment, the distance between where he is from and where he is drawn without the condescension that the surface reading of his character might suggest. He is not diminished by the gap. He has simply made his peace with it in the specific way that people who have accepted large trade-offs make their peace, by being excellent at what they actually do, by finding dignity in the work they actually have, by building a life that is genuinely theirs even if it is not the life they originally trained for. The Quick E-Mart under Apu is a neighborhood institution. He knows his customers. He gives credit to people who need it, and the show never depicts him doing this as charity. It depicts it as the ordinary business practice of a small merchant who understands that his customers' financial stability and his own are connected. When Homer cannot pay, Apu carries the tab. He carries it because he understands the social arithmetic of a neighborhood business better than any management consultant would, because he has been running this specific store in this specific neighborhood for long enough to know that the long-term relationship with the customer is worth more than the immediate collection of the debt. Chief Wiggum is Springfield's law enforcement, and his incompetence is so thorough that it has become a form of cadis in its own right. A truly incompetent police chief would fail to maintain order, would allow crime to escalate, would create the conditions for social breakdown. Wiggum does not produce these outcomes. Springfield remains stable chaotically, imperfectly, but persistently stable under his watch. This requires a different explanation than simple incompetence. Wiggum has achieved a form of equilibrium. He does not enforce the law energetically enough to disrupt the town's existing power arrangements, which means he does not threaten Burns, does not threaten the plant, does not threaten the accumulated informal agreements that keep Springfield functioning as a closed system. He is not corrupt in the Hollywood sense. He is not taking money to look away. He is simply occupying his role in a way that disturbs nothing. His incompetence is the incompetence of a man who has internalized that his role is to perform law enforcement without substantially altering the conditions that law enforcement theoretically exists to address. This is not a flattering portrait. It is a realistic one. It describes something true about the relationship between local law enforcement and local power structures in ways that the comedy packaging makes accessible without requiring the show to be didactic about it. Dr. Nick Riviera exists at the intersection of medical practice and medical malpractice in a way that serves as the show's most sustained commentary on healthcare economics. He is cheap, he is available. He performs procedures he is not qualified to perform at prices far below what qualified practitioners charge. His patients use him not because they cannot see his limitations, but because the alternative paying what qualified care actually costs is not available to them. His famous catchphrase is a greeting. Hi, everybody. Cheerful, disarming, inviting. The greeting of a man who understands that his patients need to feel comfortable with him, even though comfort in this context is the enemy of appropriate medical caution. He greets them warmly because warmth is part of the service he provides, part of what makes him accessible to people who have nowhere else to go. The warmth is genuine, and it is also professional cover for the inadequacy of the actual medical care. His presence in the series is the show's acknowledgement of a medical system in which quality of care is tied to ability to pay, in which the people least able to afford adequate health care are most likely to encounter Dr. Nick. His incompetence is funny. The system that produces his patients is the show's longest-running background critique. Sideshow Mel exists to be tragic. He is educated, eloquent, possessed of genuine theatrical gifts, and trapped in a role the silent sidekick to a celebrity clown that wastes all of them. He plays Krusty's sidekick in the same way Sideshow Bob played it before him, with the painful awareness that he is overqualified for his situation and the inability to escape it. Mel's tragedy is quieter than Bob's because Mel does not rebel. Bob rebelled, catastrophically, and the rebellion expressed something about him even if it expressed it through crime. Mel stays. He performs his function. He holds the bone through his hair, his distinctive visual signature, never explained, and he shows up every week for a show that does not use what he has. His dignity within his diminishment is one of the show's most sustained background studies in a specific kind of human endurance, the endurance of people who are better than their situation and have made peace with staying in it. Professor Frink is Springfield's scientist. He holds multiple advanced degrees. He has made genuine scientific contributions that the show occasionally depicts with technical accuracy. He speaks in a register that combines genuine intellectual sophistication with the social awkwardness of someone who has spent more time learning than socializing. He is the town's most authentic intellectual resource, and Springfield uses him the way it uses all resources that exceed its immediate comprehension, intermittently, imprecisely, and without much gratitude. Frink's relationship with Springfield is the relationship of expertise to a community that has no organized way to integrate expertise. He has knowledge the town needs. The town knows this in the abstract it calls on him in emergencies, but the knowledge never gets properly institutionalized. There is no mechanism by which Frink's understanding of radiation, of environmental chemistry, of the physical processes that the power plant is enacting on the town, no mechanism by which this understanding gets converted into policy or action. He knows what the plant is doing. Springfield cannot use that knowledge because the structures that would be required to act on it do not exist. Frink is what happens when you have the right knowledge and the wrong infrastructure to do anything with it. These side characters, Apu and Wiggum and Dr. Nick and Mel and Frink, and the dozens of others who populate Springfield's background, are the show's most significant structural achievement. They are community, not a collection of comedy props arranged around the main family, but a genuine community of people with histories and interior lives and specific relationships to the conditions of the town they live in. They are damaged by those conditions, shaped by them, adapted to them in ways specific to who each of them is. And they have been in the background for 36 years, doing their jobs, managing their situations, living their lives in the margins of a show that was never really about them and always, somehow, was. That is Springfield, full of people you haven't looked at closely enough, full of stories the show put there for you to find, full of details that have been waiting, patient and specific, in the corners of frames and the margins of episodes for the 4 hours you just spent looking at them. You looked. Now you know what was there. Springfield will be here next week. Same place. Same people. Same impossible town. The details will be waiting.